Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Boston School Committee. I'm Chairperson Jerry Robinson. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I will ask my colleagues to please unmute and join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to
and
the
to the republic for which it
for which it
stands,
stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I want to extend a warm welcome to our newest member, Chantal Lima Barbosa. I will reintroduce Ms. Lima Barbosa and give her an opportunity to say a few words at our meeting at 6 p.m. Because this is a remote meeting, I will ask Ms. Sullivan to please call the roll.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Alkins, Mr. Cardet Hernandez,
Present.
Ms. Lima Barbosa,
Present.
Mr. Mehta, Ms. Polanco Garcia, Mr. Tran,
Present.
Mr. O'Neill,
Present.
Ms. Robinson.
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion for the school committee to adjourn to executive session to discuss strategy with respect to the Tidwell report as it relates to pending or threatened litigation. To have this discussion in an open meeting could have a detrimental effect on the committee's litigating position. The committee will return to public session at 6 p.m. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins, Mr. Cardet Hernandez,
Yes.
Ms. Lima Barbosa,
Yes.
Ms. Polanco Garcia, Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill. I think you're on
Yes,
mute.
sorry, yes.
Thank you. Ms. Robinson.
Yes.
Thank you. It's unanimous.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. At this time, I'll ask my fellow members, the superintendent and staff to log off from this public session and join the executive session using the Zoom link sent out by Ms. Sullivan. We'll see you in a moment. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Boston School Committee. I'm Chairperson Jerry Robinson. The committee just returned from an executive session to discuss strategy with respect to the Tidwell report as it relates to pending or threatened litigation. To have this discussion in an open meeting could have a detrimental effect on the committee's litigating position. Attorney Tidwell will publicly present her findings in just a few minutes. Tonight's session is being shared live on Zoom. It will be rebroadcast on Boston City TV and posted on the school committee's webpage and on YouTube. The recording will be available in all of the BPS languages. Tonight's meeting documents are posted on the committee's webpage, bostonpublicschools.org/school committee, under the August 30 meeting link. The meeting documents have been translated into all of the major BPS languages. Any translations that are not ready prior to the start of the meeting will be posted as soon as they are finalized. The committee is pleased to offer live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cabovariano, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and American Sign Language. The interpretation feature has been activated. Click the globe icon at the bottom of your screen to select your language preference. I'd like to remind everyone to speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Thank you everyone who signed up for public comment. Sign up for public comment closed today at 4:30 p.m. Please make sure you are signed into Zoom under the same name you used to sign up for public comment. You can use Zoom tools to rename yourself so that committee staff will be able to recognize you when it comes time to call on you. Thank you for your cooperation. I want to extend a warm welcome to our new school committee member, Chantal Lima Barbosa. Ms. Lima Barbosa is the daughter of Cabo Verdean immigrants. She was born in Boston and raised in Cape Verde. In 2010, Lima Barbosa returned to Boston, attending the Jeremiah Ebert High School, where she graduated as valedictorian in 2012. She went on to graduate with a Bachelor of Science in Political Science in 2016 and a Master's of Higher Education and Administration in 2018 from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Ms. Lima Barbosa formerly served as liaison to the Dorchester and Cape Verdean communities in the city's Office of Neighborhood Services. She was a crucial resource for residents learning to navigate city services throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. She also served as liaison to the City Council and the Office of Intergovernmental Relations. She currently serves as Director of Recruitment for Duet, a higher education coaching nonprofit. Ms. Lima Barbosa was sworn in by Mayor Wu last Friday, and we're delighted to welcome her to her first school committee meeting. Would you like to say a few words, Ms. Lima Barbosa?
Thank you, Chair Robinson, and my colleagues, committee members, and of course, the families, community advocates that are here. I'm super excited to serve on this honorable board. I'm looking forward to meet the other committee members individually. Of course, community advocates that are always here cheering on and holding the district accountable. Please count on me as a partner, as a listener, and I'm happy that we're returning for an in-person meeting so we can actually see each other in person. So thank you so much, Chair, and the rest of y'all.
Again, thank you, and we are very excited to have you join us as we work to increase opportunities and improve outcomes for our students. We'll move on to the approval of minutes. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the June 21st, 2023 and July 26th, 2023 school committee meeting as presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Mr. Cadet Hernandez,
Yes.
thank you. Ms. Lima Barbosa,
Yes.
Ms. Polanco Garcia, Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson.
Yes.
The minutes are approved unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Before we move on to the superintendent's report, I'd like to invite Attorney Tidwell to present the findings and recommendations of her recent investigation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm joined tonight by my colleague, Janki Varoja, and she will share her screen, hopefully, so that we can just walk through quickly a summary of our report. And we do note that the report and the slides that we're using will be released publicly, so we won't spend too much time going through each because we understand that everyone will have access to them shortly. Okay. So you can go to the next slide, Janki. So I'm Natasha Tidwell. This is Janki Varoja. We're both at the law firm Mintz in Boston. And thank you for making time for us tonight, Madam Chair, School Committee, and Superintendent Skipper. You can go to the next slide, Janki. So back in August of 2022, BPS received an internal memorandum from an employee addressed to Acting Superintendent Eckelson and incoming Superintendent Skipper, notifying them of concerns related to an increase in the number of BPS senior administrators of color being investigated and or placed on paid administrative leave. The school department identified an external investigator, and I was tasked with conducting this review. Beginning in the fall of 2022, we started to compile the data that we needed for this review. this entire process took longer than anyone anticipated at the beginning for a number of reasons. One being that the data that we needed to conduct the review was not readily available, wasn't all in, there was no central repository for all of this information. We had to go to different sources within BPS to get the information and to keep sort of fine tuning and revising our request and expanding our request in some instances to get to the heart of the concerns raised by the employee. There were also scheduling concerns, both mine and others, but eventually we did get all of the data that we needed, and we began in the spring of 2023 to conduct interviews with internal and external stakeholders, including former and current BPS employees and other members of the community, including some members of the school committee and Superintendent Skipper. And finally, towards the end of the school year, we had a final report done, but obviously that required additional time to make sure that we didn't have any factual misstatements within the report, that it was our recommendations and our observations were clear to the reader, and anything that we needed to expand upon or explain further. So we've done that now, and now the report is ready for release. Next slide, please, Jackie. So to summarize the internal complaint that was received, a BPS employee noticed that within the previous 10 months, which essentially were the school year 2021 through 2022, that BPS had placed a significant number of senior administrators of color, mainly Black men and women, on paid administrative leave. And I've gotten the note in the chat to slow down, so I will do that for the interpreters. So there were a significant number of senior administrators of color, mainly Black men and women, who were put on paid administrative leave. The internal complaint, the employee requested that BPS retain an external investigator to conduct a review to determine whether there were historical patterns of implicit bias or racial discrimination in BPS's investigation and disciplinary processes. So the request was that BPS conduct a review of its data to determine over a period to determine whether or not such disparities existed. Although the internal complaint identified or was spurred, it appears, by what had occurred within the 2021 to 2022 school year, in consultation with BPS and based on the request for a review of practices over a period of time, we determined that it was appropriate both to have a data set that might be sizable enough to conduct an analysis, to expand the period of review to include the 2020 to 2021 school year, as well as the 2019 to 2020 school year. So we would have 3 years of data to work with, which essentially those years are the entirety of the Casilius administration. And although the complaint identified senior administrators of color as the population of employees that were most impacted by BPS decision-making around paid administrative leave and investigations, there is no senior administrator position within BPS. So one of our tasks was to try to, from the available employees and descriptions and roles within BPS, identify who could fairly be characterized within the senior administrator role. And so we excluded most, if not all, of the collectively bargained employees, such as teachers and custodians across BPS, and really concentrated upon people who were in policy and decision-making roles, both at the school level or within the Bowling Municipal Building. So central office managerial employees and school leaders, which included principals as well as school leaders. Next slide, please. Before we get into what the data revealed, I thought it would be helpful just to take a step back and talk about and provide an overview of the investigation and disciplinary process generally, which is helpful in understanding sort of how we broke out the numbers and what we were able to glean from the data that we received. So misconduct complaints are generally referred to one of two BPS departments, either the Office of Equity or the Office of Labor Relations. Equity handles allegations of bias-based and discriminatory conduct, along with sexual harassment and similar misconduct. The Office of Labor Relations handles all other allegations. If a preliminary investigation after a complaint is received suggests that the conduct alleged would constitute a violation of BPS policy, the district normally proceeds with an investigation. At that time, a determination of whether the employee should be placed on paid administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation is made, and the employee is provided notice of what's called an investigatory meeting. Investigatory meetings are informal conferences usually led by the subject employee's supervisor or another administrator, where the employee is given an opportunity to respond to the allegations and explain themselves. The paid administrative leave determination, whether the complaint is referred to Equity or to the Office of Labor Relations, usually involves the weighing of several criteria. And one of the things that we observed is that these criteria are not reduced to writing. They are not contained in any of the superintendent's circulars, but both OLR and Equity appear to be operating for pretty similar criteria, although there are some modest variations. And these criteria include safety concerns. So if a complaint or the allegation involves danger to a child or some safety concern around a student or employee, then the employee will be placed on paid administrative leave. If the conduct alleged involves a pattern of behavior, in other words, if the employee is alleged to have engaged in this kind of conduct previously, or if maintaining the employee in their position would jeopardize the integrity of the investigation, then a paid administrative leave recommendation or determination is made. And lastly, the decision maker or the administrator who's handling the initial complaint will assess the egregiousness of the conduct alleged. So just depending on the face of it, if it's something that warrants putting the employee on paid administrative leave, then that determination is made. Just to the paid administrative leave decision, although it is characterized as non-disciplinary or non-punitive, there is, for employees, there's real concern and stress around being placed on paid administrative leave, particularly even though they are being paid while they're gone, the stigma associated with it, or sort of the associated suspicion associated with it, it's hard to get out from under that cloud, especially when you return to work. People always sort of recall that you were placed out for this period of time. And if the investigation extends over a protracted period, then the employee can be out for a significant period of time, which only adds to the stress that they might be experiencing. Next slide, please, Jonky. So the Office of Human Capital is the ultimate decision maker in terms of paid administrative leave determinations, although OHC, the Office of Human Capital, gets the recommendation from OLR and from Equity and usually accepts the recommendation. Depending on the nature of the allegation, the district may elect to conduct the investigation internally or retain an external investigator. If the allegations are substantiated, the district will then determine what, if any, discipline is necessary. Discipline can range from an oral warning up to termination. Where the severity of the misconduct warrants a suspension or termination, a formal hearing is required. And where the severity of the misconduct warrants termination, the district may, in some instances, negotiate a separation agreement with the employee or offer the employee an opportunity to resign in lieu of termination. Next slide, please, Jonky. So now we'll go into to the findings themselves. I do want to say before we do that, that in sometime in the fall of 2022, we learned of a separate, yet somewhat similar in some respects, concern that was raised by community members, external, non-BPS employees, some former, but people who are community members who were involved and concerned about what was happening at BPS. Their concerns may or may not have been prompted by the same pattern or series of personnel decisions that prompted the internal complaint. But it was a separate complaint that was received, and it concerned, and it was a little broader than the one that led to the retention of my firm to conduct the review that I'm explaining here. That external complaint concerned the investigatory meeting process, and I think the allegation was that it was being used disproportionately and weaponized against employees of color. It included termination decisions, the role of hearing officers in individual investigations, and the merits of some recent investigations. The exclusion of the concerns raised in that complaint should not be interpreted to mean that they were deemed insignificant or that they somehow did not play or were not sort of woven in or sort of thought about or thought through as we conducted this review. We understand that Superintendent Skipper has engaged these external community members to try and provide clarity and to clarify some of the misperceptions and the misunderstanding about the scope of our review. We understand that some of that confusion still remains and regret that the timeline and scope of this review was not better communicated from the beginning and throughout the process to try to, as best as possible, to remedy that, or at least to provide some clarity there. So going into the summary of the findings here. Based on the data we received, if you average across a 3-year period, there were 246 BPS employees identified as central office managers or school leaders. So that was our target population. Of these, according to the available data, slightly more than half, or 53.6%, identified as people of color. Within the report, we break out how the demographics across each of the school years we reviewed. So how many, what percentage of the target population were people of color in each of the school years under this review. What we will provide, and what we didn't provide initially, but we will, is a breakdown of the investigations within those 3-year periods. So what we have is the collection of the entirety of the investigations conducted in that 3-year period. We will supplement with a breakdown of investigations by school year for each of the school years that we reviewed, and we'll provide that to the committee. So within the 3-year period, the 3 years under review, BPS investigated 37 members of the target population during the review period. Of those 37 investigations, 15 employees were placed on paid administrative leave pending the investigation's outcome. 7 white employees and 8 non-white employees. 22 of the 37 members of this target population were investigated but were not placed on paid administrative leave. And that is broken down 50-50, 11 white and 11 non-white. At the time of our review, 35 investigations were completed. 2 were still pending. Of the 35 completed investigations, 8 resulted in a finding of unsubstantiated, meaning that the evidence collected by the investigator did not support a finding that the employee engaged in the conduct alleged. 1 of these 8 investigations involved an employee who had been placed on paid administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. So of the number of employees placed on paid administrative leave, only 1 was placed on paid administrative leave and had their investigation result in a finding, in an unsubstantiated finding. In the remaining 27 investigations where the misconduct was sustained or the findings were sustained, the discipline ranged from remedial training up through termination. And the report itself contains a breakdown by race and by type of misconduct alleged of the disciplinary outcome for each of those investigations, of those 27 investigations where there was a finding. The report also contains, of the 37 investigations total that were conducted, a breakdown by race and by type of misconduct of the misconduct alleged, as well as the race of the employee who allegedly engaged in the misconduct. Ultimately, based on the relatively small number of employees investigated, 37 in total, and the variety of misconduct alleged, we were unable to draw a reliable conclusion as to whether and to what extent race factored into the paid administrative leave determinations or the disciplinary outcomes. But we were still able to make some observations and recommendations based on the data that we did review. Next slide, please, Jonky. The table here breaks down the 37 misconduct investigations involving the target population of employees. So the total number is 37. To the far left, you have the race of the employee who was involved, who was the subject of the investigation, along with, to the right, whether leave was determined appropriate or leave was determined inappropriate. So of the 37 investigations, 15 resulted in a paid administrative leave determination. Within that, of that 15, 8 involved employees of color and 7 involved white employees. Moving, next slide, please, Jonky. As I mentioned before, complaints and investigations are referred to one of 2 BPS departments, either Equity or the Office of Labor Relations. For the 10 investigations that were referred to Equity, this table provides the misconduct type that was alleged, the race of the employee or employees who were the subject of a complaint of that, an investigation of that type, along with the leave determination that was made in those particular instances. So as you see here, Equity investigated 10 complaints within the review period and placed 2 employees on paid administrative leave. Both of those employees were white. Next slide, please, Jonky. The remaining 27 investigations were handled by OLR, and this table reflects the type of misconduct that was alleged, along with the race of the subject employee or employees and the leave determination. And so for the 27 investigations handled by OLR, 14 investigations, the employee was not placed on paid administrative leave, and in 13 of the investigations, the employee was placed on paid administrative leave. Within that 13, 8 of the employees who were placed on paid administrative leave were employees of color, and 5 employees were white. Next slide, please, Jonky. Within the OLR investigations, they primarily involve some failure to follow protocols, procedures, or policies. In fact, 22 of the 27 investigations were categorized as failure to follow protocols, procedures, or policies. To try to get some insight or to unpack that a little bit, we requested data as to some information as to the subject matter or the gist of the concern raised that the failure to follow protocols, procedures, or policies addressed. And so this table breaks out or attempts to provide some context or some additional information about the conduct alleged in the failure to follow policies finding or investigation that was conducted. It also breaks down by race of the subject employee. One of the observations or the key observations that we made in regard to the failure to follow protocols, procedures, or policies, if you look at the table where the arrows are towards the bottom of the table, the category of misconduct or misconduct that involved the failure to follow procurement procedures or some other financial impropriety. There were 5 of those investigations which within the subject period. All involved employees of color. Within that, 3 of the employees were placed on paid administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation, and 2 were not. But one of the recommendations that we make in based on this observation and others is that the district create or implement a process for robust auditing and inspection of clusters or of its complaint investigation and disciplinary data, so that clusters like this can be identified and the district can work to identify any potentially problematic practices or trends that lead to something where you have this this percentage or this chunk of employee, this cluster of employees, it only being people of color who have been investigated for this type of misconduct. Next slide, please, Jonky. So just to
Excuse
reiterate.
me,
Yes,
please slow down.
I'm trying.
Okay, thank you.
So of the key observations, some of which I discussed previously, BPS employs informal, varied, and unwritten criteria for paid administrative leave determinations. The Office of Labor Relations placed more employees of color on paid administrative leave than the Office of Equity, but OLR handled nearly 3 times more 3 times as many investigations as the Office of Equity, and the types of misconduct, as we saw in the previous table, that OLR investigates is broader than the types of misconduct that the Office of Equity investigates. As we just noted, all 5 of OLR's investigations of alleged procurement policy violations or other financial improprieties involve people of color. And finally, while the outcomes varied across BPS, the Office of Equity was more likely to impose remedial training as a disciplinary measure than OLR. But again, it's not apples to apples because OLR is handling a different category or subset of misconduct allegations. We made one additional key observation. Next slide, please, Jonky. So we identified that there were 37 investigations within the involving senior administrators of color within our 3-year review period. We initially asked for who the population of people placed on paid administrative leave from within the senior administrators of color or the senior administrators across BPS. We observed that there were 4 employees who were placed on paid administrative leave pending dismissal for performance-related concerns, for poor performance, essentially. These were not investigations. The performance evaluation process is not connected to the investigations process. However, because these employees were put on paid administrative leave, those leave decisions were contained within our data set. And what we observed in these 4 employees who were placed on paid administrative leave pending dismissal for performance is that they were all people of color. And as you can see from the chart, 2 of these employees were dismissed, 1 resigned in lieu of termination, and the other was reinstated to a different position within BPS. But again, as part of one of our recommendations, and we'll get to that on the next slide, is around auditing and review of complaint and investigations and disciplinary data periodically, so that if there are trends or clusters of employees seemingly similarly situated who are the only ones who appear to be to fall within or to be investigated or dismissed for a category of misconduct, then that would warrant further examination by the district to determine whether or not there is some potential bias or other impropriety that might be involved in the decision making. Next slide, Jonky. And finally, as I've said, the recommendations are also contained in the report. We recommend that the district establish and implement and publish the criteria it relies upon for paid administrative leave determinations. And that the district incorporate those criteria into its notification to employees that they've been placed on paid administrative leave. And within that notification, identify the factor or factors that were relied upon in determining that paid administrative leave was appropriate. We recommend that the district establish a mechanism for consistent tracking of BPS misconduct, complaint, and investigation processes, including investigatory meetings and paid administrative leave determinations. As I said at the beginning, getting the data for this review required BPS to look into multiple data streams and within different departments. We recommend that it be collected in one place for ease of historical review, and most importantly, leading to the final recommendation, so that there can be some protocol for robust auditing of BPS investigation and disciplinary processes to identify and respond to trends and potentially problematic patterns in real time, and not in a historical sort of backwards or backward looking process as was conducted here. That concludes the summary of our review. As I mentioned before, we will be supplementing it with a breakdown of the complaint data by school year, instead of where in the report it's broken, it's all 3 years collected together. I want to thank BPS, the the employees who met with us, the people who helped us to gather the data we needed for this review, the Office of the Legal Advisor, the superintendent, school committee members who we met with, who helped us to not only fine tune our work, but to identify additional people that we should talk to as part of this review. And I want to thank the community members who shared their concerns, their opinions, their views as to our work. Their input was beneficial in helping us to fine tune and craft our data recommendation, or our data requests and the questions that we asked. So we appreciate their concern, their input, and their participation in this process. And with that, we will conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for that update and for your thorough investigation of this official and critical issue. I'll now turn it over to Chief of Human Capital, Francis Canty, and Labor Relations Director, Jeremiah Hassan, who will share how the district is taking actions on the recommendations.
Beth, I think you're muted.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
The Office of Human Capital and Labor Relations have reviewed the recommendation made by the Tidwell report and have developed steps to implement these recommendations. The first recommendation is for the district to establish, implement, and publish criteria for paid administrative leave determination. The district has started the process of revising the current superintendent circular on discipline to clearly define the factors considered when a determination is made on when to place an employee on paid administrative leave. The district will issue the revised circular upon completion of to all employees, including the district unionized workforce.
Thank you, Chief Canty. The second recommendation was to establish and improve the mechanism for consistently tracking BPS investigations. In terms of implementing this recommendation, we have already met with our outside vendor to improve our case tracking system, which will allow for better tracking and improve our ability to pull reports upon request. Additionally, we are working with our Division of Schools to provide regular communication and a real focus on training for our school leaders and our department heads on both investigations and making sure that all investigations are appropriately logged in our system so that, again, we can then pull accurate, complete, and thorough reports when necessary.
The third recommendation is for the district to establish protocols for periodic audits of BPS disciplinary process to identify and respond to trends and potentially problematic patterns. The district will conduct 2 annual audits to identify problematic trends. Thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much. As I stated earlier, the committee held an executive session earlier this evening to discuss the Tidwell report as it relates to threatened or pending litigation. To have this discussion in public could have a detrimental effect on the committee's litigation position. For that reason, I will not be opening it up to members' questions at this time. Members had the opportunity to ask questions and discuss the report in the executive session. The full report, not redacted, along with tonight's presentations, is available on the BPS website. Thank you again to Attorney Tidwell and to Ms. Canty and Mr. Hassan for their presentations. We'll now move on to the superintendent's report. The superintendent's report is going to be a long one tonight because it covers a lot of information on back to school. I'm only going to do 1 round of questions from members. As a reminder, the superintendent did offer briefings in advance of tonight's meeting to go over more in depth on these topics. Many members took advantage of that time. If you haven't, please reach out to the superintendent's team to learn more. Now I present to you our superintendent, Mary Skipple.
Thank you, Chair Robinson, and good evening to everyone. It is a lengthy report, and I will try to speak slowly for our interpreters. I want to begin by thanking Attorney Tidwell and her firm for her work over the past year. While I understand that this investigation took longer than we had initially anticipated, it was critical that Attorney Tidwell had a comprehensive and accurate data set to conduct her analysis. Collecting the correct data took longer than expected because it was not always stored in the same place. This is something that the district has already begun to improve. So going forward, all investigatory and disciplinary data can be easily culled for review. It was also important that we had an outside attorney review our data to ensure that the investigation itself was free from bias. As I stated when the investigation was started, if there were any findings of bias, we would take immediate remedial action. Attorney Tidwell was not able to conclude, as she said, that a disproportionate number of managerial employees of color were investigated or placed on administrative leave, and was not able to conclude that there was evidence of bias within the disciplinary process. Attorney Tidwell did, however, identify areas within our personnel processes that warrant additional scrutiny, including the ratios of diverse and non-diverse employees who are dismissed for performance and investigated for violations of our financial and procurement policies during this time frame. Attorney Tidwell also identified areas for our district to increase transparency, ensure consistency, and begin self-auditing for bias, which included her recommendations to 1, develop a clear written criteria for paid administrative leave, 2, to improve our personnel action data tracking, and 3, to conduct periodic self-audits for bias. As superintendent, I take these recommendations seriously and fully, and my deputies and I are working closely with the Office of Human Capital and the Office of Labor Relations to quickly implement Attorney Tidwell's recommendations. In addition to implementing Attorney Tidwell's recommendations, the district has also heard, and I have also heard, similar concerns brought by a group of former BPS leaders of color regarding the use of investigatory meetings. In response to these concerns, the district will do a few things. One, improve tracking systems for investigatory meetings. Two, provide all employees who are subject to disciplinary action with information and a link to the BPS disciplinary circular so that they can familiarize themselves with the disciplinary process and be available to answer questions. And three, notify any managerial employee who is placed on administrative leave of their right to consult an employment lawyer prior to their investigatory meeting. And lastly, ensure that the investigator does not also serve at any point as the hearing officer for disciplinary hearings. In addition to these measures, as a district, we must continue to recruit and retain a diverse workforce that reflects our young people's racial, cultural, and linguistic diversity. We must be vigilant and intentional about monitoring the data on educator retention, recruitment, staff discipline, and performance. Anything having to do with dismissals in these areas of our employees of color. I am fully committed to ensuring that we have a district that represents the students we serve by guaranteeing interviews for any qualified diverse teacher candidates who apply to open positions, and guaranteeing at least 3 interviews to any provisional teacher of color who receives a non-renewal letter, but who received a proficient performance evaluation rating and meets the minimum qualifications for the position. And additionally, we need to invest and will invest in new licensure pathways. Finally, I want to acknowledge that employee discipline, including termination, especially termination, is always a measure of last resort and taken often after careful consideration of equity principles. As a public institution, we must hold ourselves, our employees, to the highest standards to establish and maintain the public's trust. If an employee is alleged to have violated those standards, public accountability requires an investigation, and in some instances, administrative leave during the pendency of the investigation. While neither administrative leave nor the investigations are meant to be punitive, we know there is an impact that the investigatory process has on employees. To ensure that administrative leave determinations are consistent and made only when necessary, we are updating our disciplinary policies to outline the criteria for these determinations and make them clear. And as I said previously, we will ensure that all employees who are placed on administrative leave and/or investigated are provided with the disciplinary circular and notification of their right to representation or attorney during the process. While our preference is to always counsel our employees rather than impose discipline where possible, there are certain situations where the seriousness of the finding, like harm to children, financial misappropriation, significant conflicts of interest, or actions that are criminal in nature, these require the district to take disciplinary action up to and including termination. And finally, any employee who believes that they have been the subject to discrimination as a result of the disciplinary process or for any other reason, they have the right to file a complaint with the BPS Office of Equity, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination. I am personally committed to creating a working environment where staff are trained properly, uphold high professional standards, are held accountable for their actions, and are able to work and grow in a work environment that is free from bias and retaliation. I also want to make note, as Attorney Tidwell did, that the school committee has requested an additional breakdown by year, and particularly the 2021-22 school year and the 10 months that are mentioned in the letter since the initial complaint was requested that particular time period specifically. And so we will follow up on that. Thank you again to Attorney Tidwell for all of her work. And I'm now going to transition chair to the rest of the superintendent's report.
Thank you.
So I'm going to begin a bit on safety. As you may have seen in the media, there have been many incidents involving young people and violence in the community. As a district, we understand that our young people need to be seen, heard, and most important, supported. In response to the things we are seeing, we are making investments as a district that will help us to better respond and support what we are seeing with our young people. We know that there's consequences for actions. We also know that having caring, trusting adults that are working inside our schools can also make a big difference. That's why I'm happy to say that we're fully staffed with our school safety specialists, and we have our community connection coordinators that are also fully staffed, and this year will help to really build relationships with our young people and help connect them to resources, both inside and outside of the school. We have restorative justice specialists in our networks who will help to build a culture and a climate that is accepting and loving. When something happens that causes harm or has consequences, these are the folks that will help to bring closure and help our young people and the school community reach resolution. We are very much about supporting restorative justice practice. I can't underscore enough, and have always felt this as a teacher, a principal, the power of building relationships with our students and how important it is for our students to know that they have a trusted adult in the building that they can go to who will help them. It's going to take all of us working in concert, our schools and our community, to help our young people through all they've experienced post-pandemic. We are building these systems and structures so we literally can wrap our arms around our students and our families and address and support some of the issues that they are struggling with every day. As we start the school year, I ask all of our caring adults in our community to help us ensure that our students come to school. We need to see our young people in school every day and are committed to working with our families and our students to remove any barriers to them coming to school regularly. I'm going to switch to our facilities and what we're calling our facilities condition assessment. This is a much anticipated body of work that's going to be rolled out this fall. For the past 2 years, the BPS Operations Division has been working on the FCA, or what we call the Facilities Condition Assessment. This will help our overall mission of repairing, revitalizing, and reimagining our school buildings and spaces. The FCA provides an in-depth review of every physical asset in all of our buildings to address critical infrastructure needs. The FCA provides a snapshot report that tells us the condition of our buildings right now. But the exciting part of the work is that there's a public dashboard that will update regularly as repairs and renovations happen. Now that we've finished the data collection process, we're working on the public dashboard, and we expect to share it publicly later in September. We will update the committee and the public over the next few weeks when the dashboard is ready to share. In addition to the work of the FCA, the capital planning and facilities teams continue working on the school design study. And the school design study will produce three things. First, the educational specifications, which are the baseline elements that school communities need and want. Second, the design standards. These are more technical elements of the types of materials, furniture, building systems, sustainability measures that we will use in new and renovated schools. And third, a decision-making rubric. This will guide where we invest in facilities to support making the BPS high-quality student experience a district-wide reality. Our goal is to develop a rubric that is transparent, data-driven, easy to understand, and focused on creating better opportunities for our students. At our next school committee meeting on 9/13, we will share a draft overview of how we are building that rubric based on the community feedback we heard in the winter and the spring. In September and October, we will host a series of community meetings to further refine the rubric. The first of these will be an open house at the Bowling Building on September 16th from 10 to 2. Following those community meetings, we will ask this body to vote on the decision-making rubric. Having a clear policy adopted by our governing body will have a huge step toward predictability, consistency, and accelerating our much-needed facilities projects. We have an enormous amount of work ahead to shift our district's physical footprint to support a high-quality student experience for every single young person in Boston. And we're grateful that we have the commitment from our city partners to financially support this transformative work in the form of the Green New Deal. This decision-making rubric will help us make smarter, clearer decisions, and it will help us move faster with the urgency our students need and deserve. There'll be much more to come on all of this in the months ahead. I also wanted to share a quick update while on facilities on the proposal to build the new STEM campus for the O'Brien at the West Roxbury Educational Complex. Over the summer, we launched the O'Brien and Boston Tech Alumni Steering Committee to help guide planning around expanding programming, partnerships, and community engagement. This group will serve as a means of accountability to make sure this project truly takes advantage of the opportunity to finally deliver on the long-delayed promise for the O'Brien to have its own campus. And it will also connect our students with every opportunity that Boston has to offer. In July and August, we led several tours of the West Roxbury Educational Complex for O'Brien alumni and staff, and heard thoughtful feedback and ideas for envisioning the potential of that renovated space. At our next school committee meeting, we'll share our initial transportation plan designed to ensure students from all neighborhoods can continue to be full participants in the O'Brien community. We've also shared online responses to some of the FAQs and an analysis of alternative sites and the limitations those sites may have. Those are available at boston.gov/GND-BPS. We're looking forward to an open house at the rec later this fall to continue the conversation with O'Brien students, families, staff, alumni, and partners. I know there was a lot of information there. I tried to go slowly, and we'll have much of that published on our website for anyone to go and look at. Before we dive into the school readiness portion, I just want to lift a few bright spots from the summer. We had a wonderful fifth quarter. We served 9,573 students. This was a considerable amount more, about 2,500 more students than we did last year. Our students were able to really use Boston as a classroom, whether it was focusing on STEM activities or getting their hands dirty with planting gardens, learning about animals or making films and music. Our fifth quarter did a wonderful job engaging our students and connecting them to the city. We had the August Leadership Institute, which we call ALI. And this was held this year at Madison Park. I love ALI. I always did as a principal because it's really when our school leaders gather for the first time, coming back and do some really deep planning for the upcoming year. It's also an opportunity to align our work and learn from each other. This year, we had wonderful speakers. Mayor Wu kicked it off. We also had Chair Robinson. We had BTU President Jessica Tang and Secretary of Education, Dr. Pat Tutwiler, all of whom were just terrific speakers. School leaders are really excited and they're ready for the school year. And you could feel that tangible excitement during that ALI. Lastly, yesterday, it was a joy to be at the Countdown to Kindergarten at the Boston's Children's Museum. I missed it last year because I had COVID. And as a high school person, I had never gone to it. I kept hearing so many amazing things, and it did not disappoint. It was just a fun event. Chair Robinson has done so much to work to make all of this happen with the museum and really just celebrating our young people and families, our youngest learners and families. We went into many of the children's activities. There was dancing. We passed out backpacks. The kids were thrilled to pick their backpack. All kinds of goodies and information. All of the teams were there to provide important information for families or answer questions. We did vision screenings on site. It was just a wonderful, wonderful evening. And just a big thank you to Chair Robinson, to our early childhood office, both in the city and in the district, to Boston Children's Hospital, to the Boston Children's Museum of all, Cradles to Crayons helped with all of the backpack distribution, and the Mayor's Office of Early Childhood really helped to pull it all together. So that was just a lot of fun and a wonderful way to celebrate our youngest learners. So now to the back to school readiness. Really excited for the upcoming school year. I did share a memo with school committee members and covered the topics more in depth, but I did want to just lift a few key points up. On Monday night, we hosted our back to school Zoom community meeting. Chair Robinson was there, Vice Chair O'Neill was there, and our new school committee member, Lima Barbosa, was there. Thank you for joining us. We had over 800 families join and had just wonderful questions that I'm sure other people on the Zoom wanted to hear. We used both the chat function and we also used our channels of question and answer. And we were able to do it in so many different languages that it really, the interpretation services, I can't say enough. I was just proud of the whole team and how we really worked to support our families and to give them the most, the access to the information they felt they most needed at that point. It was also, having done last year's, it was about double the amount of families. So again, kudos to the also to family and community engagement team. They did a great job publicizing and supporting it. Just amazing. So I'm going to start with staffing. Our hiring's been strong this year. We have 97% of our teachers hired or on track to be hired. Right now, we have about 134 educator positions that we're still working to fill, but the team is working every day and we're determined to fill them. Our safety service specialists are fully hired, as I said earlier. Last year, we only had half of the safety specialists on board, and they've all been through their training. We've also had a very successful food service fair. 522 food service workers have been hired, and this is almost 100 more than we had hired at this time last year. Transportation, really bright spot, 675 bus monitors hired, 57 more in the process. That's about 200 more than we had at this time last year. We're fully staffed with our bus drivers, with 743 active drivers ready to report. And, that's different than last year by almost 100 drivers. We also have another group that are in queue for training. I celebrate this particularly because of the struggles that many of the communities around us and nationally are having with the bus drivers and hiring. And I think this was an example where we saw a problem, there wasn't a ready solution, and we created our own CDL training to create our own core of bus drivers. There's still a handful of positions that we need to fill, but we're just in a much different place at the start of this school year, and we feel really good about that. Big thank you to Human Capital team. It has been long days, weekends that they're working to process and onboard all of the new hires. And so just a shout out to Chief Canty and her team. Transportation team, both with the helpline, they're also ready to support families. The hotline, they're ready to support families. They have a team of over 25 multilingual transportation customer service reps for any family. They were at the event last night. They're eager to help. Just a wonderful team. And families and students can again this year track their bus with the Where Is My School Bus app. We've also, and I'm thrilled about this, we've also been able to expand the number of kitchens that will be fully operational from what was about 50 last year to 86 this year. All are ready to serve hot meals made from scratch. We have an additional 20 that will of kitchens that will come on board by November. And we're diversifying the menu. We'll be including halal and kosher meals this school year as well. And the scratch kitchens will just open up lots of opportunity for us. This summer, the buildings have been cleaned. They're gleaming, given some updates that I think will make a big difference. There's new paint in many, shiny buff floors, masonry work, playgrounds. Some have actually received full bathroom renovations that just look beautiful. Last year, we started the school year with 20 schools receiving 916 AC units. This year, we have 78 schools and more than 3,800 units. So just a lot of work by our facilities department to get the work complete. And they'll be working through the weekend and all of next week to make sure that we're fully ready. In terms of the health services, even though we've come a long way over the past few years, we're still working closely with the Boston Public Health Commission, who have advised us once again on COVID protocols for this coming year. The protocols are same as the summer. They're different than last school year. We're not going to be giving out the biweekly tests or doing symptomatic tests in schools, but we will have tests at the ready should we need them. All schools also have child size and adult size masks for anyone who wishes to have them. Vaccination, last year we vaccinated over 5,000 members of the BPS community for flu and COVID. And we're working once again with our health partners across the city to offer additional clinics this year. Again, to protect everyone from COVID and other respiratory illnesses, viruses, we ask that people stay home if they're sick and have symptoms and practice good hand hygiene. That will be reinforced at the schools. Last year, flu and RSV actually drove our numbers. And so, this year we'll be keeping an eye on all of that and working hand in hand with the Health Commission. In addition to all the operational work that goes into getting the schools ready, what we do is all about academics, and our academics team has been working hard to align the work across our schools. They've had a very particular focus on strong instruction, creating welcoming and supporting environments, engaging students to strengthen their attendance, and I will keep saying that, and expanding inclusive education opportunities for our multilingual learners and students with disabilities across the district. We, different from last year to this year, we have a fully staffed leadership team relative to the Office of Specialized Services and the Office of Multilingual and Multicultural Learners. We're welcoming several new team members who will help lead our inclusive education work. Leading the Office of Specialized Services, we proudly announced Chief of Specialized Services, Kay Seal, Deputy Chief of Services and Support, Olga Kariga, Deputy Chief of Specialized Programming, Lauren Viviani. And I also want to thank publicly Lauren for serving as our interim assistant superintendent for special ed last year. You did a wonderful job, and we really thank you. Leading the Office of Multilingual and Multicultural Education, Deputy Chief of Instructional Supports, Carolina Armstrong, and Deputy Chief of Operations and Accountability, Brittany Baggett. It is just wonderful to have the new staff in place. I think that, this is going to be a year that we really, with our schools, begin to move this work, and having all of these talented, seasoned veteran leaders in these two offices is incredible for us. I also want to give a welcome to Francis Canty, who is our new Chief of Human Capital, and Magali Sanchez, who is our new Chief Family Advancement Officer. Having this team in place as we start this new year means so much. It gives us much needed capacity to really implement all of the work ahead. And I'm thrilled to have them on the team. And finally, if families have questions before the start of school, we're listing all of the places that they can go to get more information or support. I really couldn't be more excited for the start of this school year. I'm really looking forward to seeing our students in action as they come through the doors, smiling and ready for school. There'll always be adjustments, in the first few weeks. It takes time for all of us, parents, students, all of our staff, to just get used to the new routines. But having the staff and the systems in place to manage them means everything. And I know it's going to be a great school year. So lastly, I'll close, Chair. I just want to echo my welcome to Chantel Lima Barbosa. I was at her swearing in last week. I really look forward to working with you. I'm deeply proud that we have another BPS alum on the school committee, and it's an alum from the Burke. I know that the whole Burke community is cheering you on. And with that, Chair, I conclude my report.
Thank you. I'll now open it up to questions and discussions from the committee, and I'm going to remind everyone, we're going to have one round, so choose your one or two questions carefully and check in with the superintendent and her staff if you have more questions. So, who would like to begin? No questions? Ms. Barbosa, do you have a question? No? I have one question then. Question, I was very excited to see all of the pictures of your new heads of programming, et cetera. Are all of your critical leadership positions now filled? Or do you have others that still are waiting?
Let's see. I believe we're full at this time. I think we have one hire in process, Chair, but I think we're full. It is, I will say this, it is not just about being full, it is about the amazing talent and years of experience that this team has. I mean, these are tried and true who have done this work. And that, I mean, I think for me, and I know for Dr. Chen in OMME and in specialized services, that team, I would put that team up against anybody. So yeah, I mean, I think it's the quality, right? And we've been very deliberate, I think, in our hiring in this way to make sure that we have people with good experience, their mindset and their practice and their hearts all speak to moving Boston forward, moving BPS forward.
Great. My second question is about the impact of the fifth quarter. I was very excited to see the variety of opportunities that kids had, as well as the numbers that have increased. My question is, how will the fifth quarter impact what we do for our students in the regular school year? Are we learning things, exciting ways that kids are learning that would have an opportunity to be continued or incorporated into the way we do schooling year round?
Yeah, this is a great question, Chair. So we will report out more fully on the summer programming itself, results oriented, and so forth. But I think, what we're doing is gaining strong partnerships that happen during that summer. And we're really letting the students drive in terms of telling us what they enjoyed doing and what they didn't. And I think that's really key to getting to having our students come to the summer programming. I also think we're working in conjunction with the city in this way. In terms of we're looking now at the school year and what would be the things that we could continue for our students. For instance, we know in particular that our 12 to 14-year-old students, they're struggling social emotionally. We also know that's often where the least programming exists. So that's a perfect example of us going back through the data and the students' experiences and what they say about them and deciding which of those partners we're going to continue with for the school year itself. And that's something we've not done before. We haven't had the same intentionality during the school year as we have the summer for activities. So we will be using the data and the surveying of the students to drive that.
Great. And this lastly, in terms of being at ALI, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that we had the wonderful opportunity of hearing Mr. Maida play as part of the group of students who were performing for us from the Arts Academy. So we got to see him in his element with his peers, and it was
That was
wonderful.
not the Arts Academy, but okay, go on.
Well, with a group. But you were representing Arts Academy.
Yeah.
But what was the name of the group that was performing? It was, what was the name of your group?
Boston Music Project. Boston Music Project.
Great. It was wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually Boston Music Project did a little thing last night,
Right.
yesterday, right? At the Countdown to Kindergarten. But it was, Diego, you're very talented.
Yes. It was great hearing you. Mr. Cardet Hernandez.
Thank you so much for the report. I'm gonna power through, given that we have 5 minutes for discussion tonight, which is like a whole different conversation. Inclusion planning teams, you mentioned the rollout of additional ones. Can you give us any numbers there? How many, and then what are the next steps in that process?
Sure. So, Dr. Chen, I know this is, you love this narrative, so I'm gonna let you come on this one.
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for the question. This year, every school will have an IPT or an inclusion planning team. So that is slated to start once school starts. So we can give you an update as to which ones have met and so on, if you want that once this school year has begun. But our school leaders and our union partners were informed at the end of last year, and they began building out the teams.
Perfect. And then is the expectation that the following school year, every school will be implementing an inclusion plan?
So every school with grades K0, K1, K2, 7th grade, and 9th grade. Sorry, I'm just trying to make.
Yeah.
Will be having an inclusion plan for those specific grades. But I would also want to make sure folks know that we have instructional expectations for all grades, but that we will make the structural changes for inclusive classrooms in those grades for the following school year.
Exciting. Thank you so much. I look forward to hearing more as the year progresses on where we are, and any sort of structural things that we're noting will be happening as a result of this planning process. The second question I have is just around enrollment. Do we have an update on enrollment? Are we up? Are we down?
Yes, right now we have between we have a little over 50,000 enrolled. I say that with caution because we go through a DNR process, and it's hard to say. What we do know is our multilingual learner numbers are up about 20% from where they were last year, and they were up last year a great deal from the year before. So we are definitely seeing high numbers in MLE. We also are, I believe, if I recall, it's about 350 additional special education students have registered. And so it's hard to say on the do not report what percentage we will kind of see at the day's end. But I can say that the enrollment center is a happening place every day, and as is our testing centers.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And then I guess my last question here, and I think it's two-part. One is just around the sort of facilities assessment that's happening now and the timeline. Do we have any greater clarity on the timeline for the development of a master's facility plan this year?
I mean, I think what we had and Dell, Dell Stanislaus, Chief Stanislaus, I'll ask her to come on, but our commitment has been before the end of this year, calendar year. So I think that is the timeline that we're still working toward. And Chief Stanislaus.
Yep. Thanks, Superintendent. We are still working within that timeline. So we're currently working with the DLR team and PFD on the school design study, and pieces of the school design study will roll into the long-term, the district-wide facilities plan. The FCA, our facilities team has wrapped up the FCA, and they're working on communicating it out publicly. Pieces of that data pieces from the FCA will also inform the district-wide facilities plan. So we are currently still on track for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That final, I'm hearing an echo. Oh, but it was from yours. Okay, the sort of follow-up question to that, and thank you so much for the answer. With the finalizing of the FCA analysis, and the implications for facilities planning, when will folks see that publicly, and will it specifically name capital challenges, and will it name investment priorities, or will it just be summary? Like, how are you thinking of the presentation for the public?
Specific to the FCA, I will bump it over to our chief, our COO, Teresa. If Teresa's on.
Hi there, thanks, Del. So for the facilities condition assessment, we'll be publicly releasing the reports and a dashboard for the public to use at the in the middle of the fall. So we have all the information. We're working on editing the dashboard, so it'll become a public dashboard in the fall.
But without any sort of implications for future planning, just information based on what we saw.
Yeah, so the facilities condition assessment is a tool that the facilities team internally will be using to make an infrastructure plan, and then it will support Dell and her team as the long-term facilities plan is being created as well.
Copy. And my last question, exciting news on the hiring this year. And Superintendent, you know, that was sort of my greatest concern last year as you were coming in and throughout the year. So bravo to you and the team on just like reducing that that gap that we saw previously. I will ask the same question that I will probably ask every year, which is, when will families get information that their child does not have a certified teacher, and what can they do with that information?
Yeah, so we're pulling that data. I don't have that yet in terms of the classrooms. That'll probably be mid-September that will kind of have everything shake out. And at that point, I'll come back to school committee and let you know what our plan is going to be with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Dr. Alkins?
Hi, thank you for the report. First and foremost, I want to welcome our newest member. I didn't get a chance to necessarily do that. I've been busy, but certainly welcome to the successes as well as the muddiness of school committee. So we appreciate your perspective and the commitment to the work. That said, my question to the superintendent is actually sort of dovetailing off of what Member Carteret Hernandez brought up with respect to the new teacher hires. Do we have a breakdown of that? Maybe I missed it, a breakdown of those new teachers with respect to ESL certifications.
Through you, Chair, we don't have that prepared for tonight, but we can certainly get that to you. Yeah, I mean, right now OHC is really focused on hiring and onboarding, and I'm trying to keep their focus on onboarding and hiring so we get the vacancies. But we'll do our best to get data pulled once we start to kind of clear the deck of folks for onboarding. We can get that to you in a reasonable time, Dr. Hawkins.
No problem. Thank you. And then just another question. I know, rounding out August, the Leadership Institute, just wondering if you have any updates on the progress of that, and just how staff morale, how everyone is feeling coming into the new year.
Yeah, I think it was I think everybody's in a really good place. I think that I think finally we have some stability, and we're not changing up everything for the field. We're asking people to go deeper. And I think for leaders that obviously there's some things for leaders that are going to be a lot. We're going into reimagining funding, certainly coming down off ESSER. There's things on everyone's mind, but I think the things that right now are within our control, they see good planning for, they see lots of support. The regional network model is clearly resonating with leaders and their needs. There was, I went into many of the sessions. There was deep data work happening that I can say back when I was a principal, we didn't have the tools for. And so to really see our leaders going deep with their data and talking about practice and equitable literacy, inclusive environment, and what that would be like in their school, there was a lot of, I think, engagement and just positivity. So We also, this has been the least changeover of the principals. So I think, seeing the same faces and not seeing a lot of changeover is also reassuring for the principals in a lot of ways. So I think, from my perspective, I think it was very successful. Just a huge shout out to the team that prepared for ALI on Dr. Chen's team and on the school's team. They just did a great job setting up the leaders for having everything they needed. And this year we had teachers attend as part of the team for the leader. And I think that made a difference for the leader to know their team was there to do the work with them. Sometimes it's very lonely when you're the leader and you're like getting all the data and you're trying to figure it out instead of having the people that are going to be there with you during the school year. So to me, that was a real added bonus of having the teachers come.
Yes, thank you. And I think my last question is actually with respect to just where we are in terms of our full complement of safety specialists and those people who are trained with trauma-informed practices and restorative justice, like within our schools.
Sure. So actually, Chief Coakley, I'm going to let you should come on and share that good news. Assuming Chief Coakley's on.
Yes.
I am.
There you
Hello.
are, okay. She's recovering from the dodgeball tournament that happened earlier today.
Long day. Good evening, everyone, and thank you guys for having us again, and welcome back, everyone. I'm happy to say that we have done a robust hiring for our safety specialists, and we went out and just through relationships and through community engagement, put out some posts for those positions, and we had an excess of over 100 people apply for positions. So we are close to onboarding back to our original numbers. When I first came, we had 78. So we're back up to those numbers again for our new year coming in. And as the superintendent mentioned a couple of times this evening, our community connection positions, we had the former SOAR workers from the city of Boston come over, and they have successfully been onboarded as well. That's 19 of those with a new deputy to lead them. The deputy is, and I'm pretty sure we'll probably give a presentation later on, but I'm very excited and I'm excited and honored to report that.
And Chief, can you just speak to the training? I think Dr. Hawkins was just asking about them, the de-escalation training, trauma-informed practice.
Matter of fact, we're doing some training tomorrow. Everyone has had our safety care training, which is the BPS de-escalation training, our restorative justice training. We've also had Roka, who is one of our community partners, come in and do some training on trauma-informed and youthful brain, and they have a whole curriculum of communicating with young people to the best practices.
Great.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions before we move forward? Mr. O'Neill?
Madam Chair, and some of the topics already discussed, particularly about inclusion, so I'm not going to carry on that. I do have a question about transportation, question about food service, and then a question about hub schools. So on transportation, I know some of the charter schools have already started, and I've certainly already seen some of the Boston Public School buses out. Where do we stand on the drivers doing their bids and actually doing the practice runs, and how we're feeling about, there's always some challenges on those first couple of days. So Superintendent, how are we feeling about that actual startup the first few days? I'm really glad to hear the staffing numbers and having the backups, but how are we feeling about doing the practice routes, et cetera?
Yep. So I think Dan Rosengard can give the field perspective, but everything that I've heard has been very positive. The bids are happening. As you know, one of the statistically, one of the challenges for us has been the charters that start the earliest. But so far this year, being fully staffed really has helped that. Dan?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So both our driver and monitor bids happened successfully last week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of last week. And our big focus between now and the start of the year is doing those final checks and making sure that drivers are doing those practice runs. So we've been working closely with TransDev on that and getting daily updates there. As of earlier today, I believe we had just crossed the 50% mark of drivers completing their practice runs, and we're going to keep pushing that until the first day of school. So I think we're doing what we can. Certainly, we anticipate there will be some hiccups on the first day. We continue to see student assignments change as well, and so even from what the drivers bid on, there will be some route changes as we do those last minute bus assignments to make sure we're getting students transportation for the first day. But we're going to keep doing everything we can to get those dry runs as close to 100% as possible.
Okay, and two ancillary questions on that. One, do we feel with the drivers that we have, we're going to be able to cover all the sports and field trips needs as well? Because that was a huge issue last fall. And then two, I think the Red Line is planning some closings in October. I don't think the Green Line closings out in Somerville affect us, but maybe for some staff getting to work. But the Red Line in particular, I think is going to be, because that's going to be a 2-week closing. So how are we planning around that?
Yeah, we actually just kicked off earlier today. We had our first meeting with partners from the city and the MBTA about that to start to put in place contingency plans there and make sure we have supports for students. So we're jumping into that and hope to have more information to share soon. And for athletics, we're working closely with the athletics team to make sure that we have sufficient capacity and also to do everything we can to schedule in such a way to maximize our ability to cover those. Definitely last fall, you're right, we were still seeing significant challenges there. We made some really big strides from fall to spring last year, and what we saw for spring last year actually is we had a 97% on-time performance for athletics trips specifically, and so we hope to continue to see that momentum this fall.
Great, thank you. It's so important not to let our student athletes down and other students that are going on field trips and those type of things. Critical. Thank you, Mr. Rosengard. On food service, and good luck next week. On food service, Superintendent, I was intrigued by the numbers, and I'm very encouraged by the amount that are going to be doing fresh preparation at the schools. Is that also through City Fresh? So are they supplying for that, or is City Fresh only do the vended meals?
No, so actually just the vended meals. So we hired Annalise Tanner, who I know you guys will remember from the announcement, who is a rock star food service director. She is one of the people, when I talk about kind of the experience and innovative thinking, she's there. She really has worked hard with our current food staff to be able to operationalize and hire. So the 86 scratch are just that, they're scratch. They're fresh from food that we order in bulk that are then served up in the kitchens. It had always been the plan to phase off of the City Fresh packaged food, although very nutritious and fresh, but to be able to operationalize the scratch kitchens. So as the hiring has kicked in, and they had about 100 at the hiring fair, so they've done a great job publicizing it. They've also made some changes to make sure that those whose English is not their primary language are able to apply and secure the jobs with particular safety terminology and vocabulary. I think it has kind of opened things up for us. And Annalise has really worked hard in the operations side with this. She has great ideas. Salad bars are going to be back. And this will enable us to really get our kids another protein in those salad bars. So just lots of things to come there. We'll do a special presentation just on the food and nutrition side.
Okay, I am out of time, so thank you. I do look forward to hearing that. I'm thrilled we're doing halal and kosher meals. I look forward to hearing what we're doing about vegetarian and gluten-free as well, and that the meals are actually healthy. It can be made by scratch, but that they're healthy. I know we had started down that direction in a wonderful way with the My Way cafes, and I'd love to see, thank you, vegetarian available every day. Excellent. So look forward to that presentation, and I'll send in my other questions separately because I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, there's no further discussion. I would now like to entertain a motion to receive the superintendent's report. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Hearing none, Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Mr. Cadet Hernandez, Ms. Lima Barbosa,
Yes.
Ms. Polanco Garcia, Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson.
Yes.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to general public comment. Ms. Sullivan?
Thank you, Chair. The public comment period is an opportunity for parents, caregivers, students, and other concerned parties to make brief presentations to the school committee on pertinent school issues. Questions on specific school matters are not answered at this time, but are referred to the superintendent for a later response. Questions on specific policy matters are not answered at this time, but may be the subject of later discussion by the committee. We have 9 speakers this evening. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak, and I'll remind you when you have 30 seconds remaining. If your remarks are longer than 3 minutes, please email your comments for distribution to the committee. The time that an interpreter uses for English interpretation will not be deducted from a speaker's allotted time. Speakers may not reassign their time to others. Large groups addressing the same topic are encouraged to consolidate their remarks or choose a spokesperson to provide testimony. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. Please direct your comments to the chair and refrain from addressing individual school committee members or district staff. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom, and please make sure you're signed into Zoom with the same name that you used to sign up for public comment. That will allow us to identify you when it's your turn to testify. We'll begin this evening with Kim Emery, followed by Edith Bazile, Ruby Reyes, Michael Heischman, and John Mudd. If you could please raise your hands virtually. Kim Emery.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Kim Emery. I'm a BPS grad, a mom of a BPS grad, and a mom to a current student. With the months of public testimony from concerned students, families, educators, it tells us that it was a really challenging year last year on a number of fronts. Personally, when standing up to the district, when a student with disabilities was not receiving FAPE, their legally protected free and appropriate education, and elevating this to DESE so that corrective action could be received, there was little comfort when BPS was found out of compliance. It was just an awful process. Unfortunately, far too many families probably experience similar responses directed at a complainant just trying to hold the district accountable. Here are just a few words to describe the experience: admonishing, abusing authority, blaming, blindstanding, centering policies and practices benefiting adults rather than students' best interests, compromising civil rights, defaming, disenfranchising, eroding trust, excluding, fabricating, falsifying, gaslighting, harassing, insulting, intimidating, just plain making things up, languishing, lacking urgency, misleading, manipulating, neglecting, obfuscating, othering, retaliating, ridiculing, spin doctoring, stonewalling, and sadly, the list could go on. I want to reassure other families that if this too describes your experience fighting for the rights of your loved ones in the district, please speak your truth. We believe you. You should never have had to seek a fair outcome for the legally protected rights of a student with disabilities outside the district in the first place. BPS and school committee, with the new school year, this is an opportunity to do better for all families, but especially for those with loved ones who are historically and intentionally marginalized. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Edith Bazile.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Despite the report we just heard, we all know that BPS is a two-track system for Black educators, just as it is for students. Everyone is aware of it, but BPS does not confront it. Why? Because dismantling the status quo of political, economic, social power and privilege requires a commitment to racial equity. Is racial equity a priority of this administration? Let's look at the past year. We witnessed the Office of Equity moved out of the superintendent's office to the back of the building and buried under family and community engagement with no family and community engagement. The racial equity planning tool has become a thing of the past. Community equity roundtables were suspended with no explanation. Racial equity work that is performative is racial equity denial. An example of racial equity denial is the McKinley Schools. The head of McKinley Schools pushed out 22 Black educators over the past 3 years, and chronic absenteeism of Black students skyrocketed. Last year, less than 15 students showed up daily at the McKinley Prep due to administrative chaos. The working group accomplished nothing because BPS maintained the same ineffective McKinley leadership and broken structure that perpetuates physical, emotional, and academic harm to students. This is an abdication of the racial equity work to which Mel King, a visionary transformational educational leader, was committed. Research affirms systemic improvement cannot be achieved without Black educators, but Black leaders in BPS have a title with no power or influence unless they uphold the status quo and go along to get along. Those committed to authentic racial equity work are demonized, isolated, and pushed out, leaving others wondering what happened. This sends a clear message that BPS is a hostile, unsafe workplace for educators committed to racial equities. Questions surround why central office staff is so heavy while every school is not staffed with reading specialists and restorative justice workers. How are school leaders and classroom teachers expected to close gaps without these supports? We've heard no data on academic outcomes for the past year, which is the data that really counts. We are not here to be cheerleaders for ineffective leadership. We must have honest conversations and dismantle systems and structures of anti-Blackness that target Black educators and harm students and families. High quality education is not only a civil right, it is a human right. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ruby Reyes.
My My name is Ruby Reyes, and I'm the Executive Director of the Boston Education Justice Alliance and a Dorchester resident. Superintendent Skipper's evaluation process does not incorporate the voices and feedback of those most directly impacted by her poor leadership, which is BPS parents, students, and educators. As this committee considers the superintendent's evaluation, please think about the testimony you have heard over the past year. School communities continue to testify and organize around the many broken promises of communication, community engagement, rash building decisions, staff not getting paid, persistent transportation disasters, and a budget process that was embarrassingly uninformed. Do not confuse community engagement for community outrage. In the coming year, school communities will have to bear the brunt of major staffing loss. Over 610 positions are covered by ESSER funds, which will run out. The budget Skipper created and you all passed with only 2 votes against it, did not and has not presented a plan for how school communities will not be hurt. This is irresponsible and will hurt schools, educational outcomes, and students. The 9 restorative justice positions that Superintendent Skipper highlighted as one of her accomplishments is not hers, and they have not been fully hired. Family and community advocates pushed uphill for more money to be invested in restorative justice instead of school hardening approaches. The parent mentor programming highlighting parent leadership was not funded, and the equity tool continues to be haphazardly completed after decisions are made. The O'Brien school community was receiving email notifications while a press conference announcing their school would be moving was taking place in front of their school. English learner students receiving entitled services is not an accomplishment, it's an educational right. The bare minimum and doing the less than that is not an accomplishment. Black educators protested outside the bowling building about the ongoing year-long investigation into the targeting of Black educators and administrators, which has resulted in nothing but silence and secrets. Superintendent Skipper's verbal commitments are performative. There is no substance or strategic commitment. When will this school committee hold a superintendent accountable that at bare minimum does not actively harm parents, students, and educators, and the schools they are maintaining? The time is now. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michael Heichman.
Mike Heichman, Beja, Dorchester. Today, I wish to evaluate the leadership team, which includes Mayor Wu, her appointed board, and your superintendent. Racism came to the Americas in 1492, and the resistance against racism was born. Racism and its resistance has always been part of the story of our country, and of course, an essential part of BPS's story. Under Dr. Cassellius' leadership, at times the forces opposing racism and promoting justice and equity were stronger. 3 brief examples. The exam schools became more inclusive. Under the leadership of Dr. Charles Granson, equity became a major part of Dr. Cassellius' mission. The racial equity tool was used often in making important policy decisions. Since the new misleadership team took office over a year ago, the forces promoting racism and white supremacy have become stronger. A few examples. 1, Black and brown anti-racist leaders at central office have been harassed, bullied, and demoted and fired. A year ago, this month, 15 high-ranking retired Black educators have sent a letter to the superintendents. Ms. Skipper has taken control of the investigation against herself, which is a major conflict of interest. Finally, today, we have the report, which is a diversion. What Ms. Skipper did once she was appointed was not included. The report is a bad joke, and the racist cover-up continues. This cover-up has been enabled by you, the mayor's appointed board. I recently heard that Ms. Skipper has fired Dr. Charles Granson. Dr. Granson is an outstanding leader and educator. I'm heartbroken. Ms. Skipper's definition of affirmative action is to harass and fire anti-racist Black and brown central office educators and replace them with her Somerville cronies who will be loyal to her. 2, at the start of the school year, Dr. Cranston's office and the commitment to equity was moved metaphorically into the basement. The Community Equity Roundtable only met 4 times this past year, and Ms. Skipper only attended once. 3, I have attended almost every school committee meeting. I have seen no evidence at these meetings that the racial equity tool has been used.
30 seconds.
While there is still no long-range plan to modernize our school facilities, Mayor Wu and Ms. Skipper recently announced their plan to take care of privileged white children. The O'Brien will be moved from West Rock to Roxbury into the edge of the community in white West Roxbury. The new O'Brien will be much less diverse, and the few Black and brown children who attend will be burdened by spending more of their precious time on public transportation. There will be an additional 500 seats for our most privileged students. Meanwhile, most of our Black and brown, I'll hopefully have time to continue with my testimony later this evening. I'm not sure if I will be. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is John Mudd, followed by Lisa Geisbond, Sharon Hinton, Deirdre Manning, and Kamani James. If you could please raise your hands virtually. John Mudd.
Hi, my name is John Mudd. Can you hear me?
Yes, good evening.
Yes, good evening. My name is John Mudd. I'm a longtime education advocate in Boston and a resident of Cambridge. First, I want to reiterate and outline the major concerns I expressed in the written memo I sent you at your last meeting on the evaluation of the superintendent. I would hope these long-term critical issues will receive attention in your evaluation discussion tonight, leading to priorities for the new year. First, achievement remains unacceptably low for marginalized students, and achievement gaps remain unacceptably large. There has been a lack of progress on teacher racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity. I still hear the lack of commitment to a master facilities plan that includes specific recommendations on school closures, mergers, renovations, and construction, with authentic equity analysis and community engagement before it is finalized. I don't think that ed specs and a rubric are a master facilities plan. Second, overall, I'm very concerned that a major policy plan for multilingual learners and inclusive education has apparently been sent to the state without a full public discussion and approval by the full school committee. I and others on the ELL task force have recommended that the single most important priority for multilingual learners and multilingual learners with disabilities is that they receive access to native language instruction as the most effective evidence-based method for students to learn academic English and grade-level academic content. Maria Serpa and I have developed a one-page statement of principles for effective inclusion for these students. I trust it's been distributed to you. There are clearly major differences between these principles and the BPS plan. We appreciate that Deputy Superintendent Linda Chen and other senior staff met with some of us to review the draft. We had many issues with the plan as presented. DESE still seems to be pushing for compliance with question 2 type English immersion. We have offered repeatedly to join with BPS in going to DESE to explain the rationale for expanded access to native language instruction as provided in the Look Act. What I most want to emphasize is my deep concern that without asserting and insisting on its role in setting district policy for these multilingual learners and multilingual learners with disabilities, the school committee is allowing itself and the public to be sidelined and marginalized. That shouldn't be allowed to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lisa Geisbond.
Good evening. I am Lisa Geisbond, Executive Director of Citizens for Public Schools, a statewide public education advocacy organization. I live in Brookline. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. For more than 40 years, CPS has stood for equity, racial justice, and quality education for all Massachusetts public school students. I speak today to support the multiple groups and individuals who have spoken out about BPS's failure to follow through on promises to investigate, report back, and address allegations that Black and Brown Central Office leaders have been targeted and pushed out. A full year has passed since these allegations were presented to district leadership, yet there's been little to no transparency or evidence that any significant action has been taken. We recognize these issues existed before Superintendent Skipper's arrival. However, the superintendent was alerted to these problems at the beginning of her tenure. She quickly promised to investigate the charges and report back on steps to end, any and all practices that target or show bias toward any staff. Yet there has been no reporting until tonight, and by many accounts, the same racist practices and problems continue. According to the signatories of the August letter to Superintendent Skipper, only one signer has been interviewed in the investigation that was underway for a year. The school committee and district leaders claim to embrace the principles of anti-racism. BPS even invited author Ibram Kendi to speak to principals and headmasters at an August leadership orientation about putting anti-racist racial justice principles into practice. But the school committee has remained virtually silent regarding the elephant in the room, the substantive allegations of continuing racist practices in the district. A climate of fear pervades the district, with former and current administrators of colors writing that concerns about retaliation inhibit them from signing their names to a report about racist practices. The report was authored by a Black and Brown affinity group at the Bowling Building back in August 2020. Not only does this ongoing climate of fear keep problems from being fully aired and addressed, it ultimately degrades the teaching and learning climate and opportunities for students of color and all students. In closing, we support demands by educators, administrators, and others that BPS provide a thorough response to the allegations and expand its investigation to include interviews with a greater number of signers of the original letter from the concerned educators of color. Then BPS must share the results of the investigation and next steps to address ongoing problems of district inequities. It is not up to the superintendent alone. The school committee should take a more active role in ensuring that matters of this nature are addressed in a district under their authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Sharon Hinton. Sharon, you're muted.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Sharon Hinton, Hyde Park homeowner, former BPS student, parent of a BPS graduate, educator, and executive director of Black Teachers Matter. I haven't testified in a long time, and there's so much to cover. Where do we start? First, congratulations to the recent mayoral appointee to the Boston School Committee, Chantel Lima Barbosa. Welcome back to all BPS parents and students, and good luck and God bless. You'll all need it. You know, there's a saying, clowns will always be clowns, and eventually you have to ask yourself why you keep going to the circus. And speaking of the political circus, while I appreciate Attorney Ted Wells' report and Superintendent Skipper's response, a year later, we are still no closer to finding out why experienced Black teachers and administrators feel they are being pushed out and marginalized in BPS. 45% of BPS parents want other high schools. Mayor Wu continues to ignore the 99,000 Boston residents who voted for an elected school committee. School safety, more AP courses, special ed, and COVID learning losses are still issues. School bus times, teacher shortages, exam school admissions, and the DESE sword of Damocles. And then there are the many times when the superintendent and mayor make announcements, take photo ops claiming parents, teachers, and the community were consulted, and yet the community, along with some school committee members, go, huh? What? You know, Barnum and Bailey no longer exists because of the cruelty to animals, and so the circus as we knew it no longer exists. When will the appointed school committee no longer exist and be returned to the vote of the people? Does this appointment experiment amount to cruelty because of what's happening to our families with the support of the only appointed school committee in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? I recognize and appreciate the talent, time, skills, and hard work of the current school committee, BPS, and Superintendent Skipper. However, can we make sure that in this democracy, an appointed school committee no longer exists in Boston? Finally, kudos to Edith Bazil, Ruby Reyes, and all the supporters who protested in front of the Bowling building last week, supporting Black educators. You know, it's always fun going to the circus, and sometimes I miss it. But it's time for this one to end. Restore the elected school committee and the vote that determines what happens in our schools. I'm Sharon Hinton, and there are so many reasons why Black teachers matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Deirdre Manning.
Good evening. Ms. Sullivan will provide you with the chart that I reference in my comments tonight. I am a resident of Dorchester, a public servant, single parent, and sole supporter of 2 minor children. My children and I have been members of the Henderson Inclusion School Committee since 2016. Last year, my older daughter left the Henderson School because of near daily violence in her classroom by boys who were transferred into a school in crisis after the principal was knocked unconscious after an assault by a 16-year-old girl. Since leaving the Henderson to attend a public charter school in Boston, my daughter has lost bonus points. The poverty rate for her charter school is just below the 40% rate that gives students 10 bonus points. The poverty rate at the school is trending in the right direction, but because it's a 5-year average, it will take a year or two to reflect the actual poverty rate at the school, which was 44% last year. In Mr. Cardette Hernandez's words, I also do not understand why children who are not economically disadvantaged are granted bonus points because they, quote, hang out with poor people, end quote. BPS data shows that admittance rates for students with and without points by tier shows that in tiers 1 through 3, there is only a 5% difference between students with or without points. In tier 4, children with points have a 92% admissions rate, and children without points have an 84% admittance rate. In tier 5, 100% of the students with points received an invitation, and 88% of the children without points received an invitation. In tier 6, 76% of children with points received an invitation, and only 55% of children without points received an invitation. In tiers 7 and 8, however, the difference between students can only be described as a chasm. In tier 7, 27% of the students without points received an invitation of admission, while 59% of the students with points received one. In tier 8, only 32% of students without points received an invitation, while 75% of students with points received an invitation. I do not understand why 11-year-old children should suffer for the sins of incompetent or indifferent BPS administrators, from incompetent or indifferent BPS superintendents, or from incompetent or indifferent mayors. I spoke to one of the exam task force members whose daughters are friends with my daughters. I told him that if circumstances next year were the same as those for this past year, that my daughter was mathematically eliminated from an opportunity to be admitted to Boston Latin School, and was virtually eliminated from an opportunity to receive an invitation to Boston Latin Academy or the O'Brien. His response was that he did not think the policy would be changed as it was having its intended effect, and that we should consider under other schools. I do not understand why my daughter and others like her would be excluded from opportunities as residents of the city. I would ask that someone from Boston Public Schools or the school committee contact me to listen to my concerns in more detail. I don't know how anyone would allow a policy like this to continue, where it deliberately excludes children from opportunities for admissions to the 3 exam schools. This past summer, I looked at an apartment in a neighborhood. I'm almost done. I looked at an apartment in a neighborhood that is a 7-minute walk from where we live. The rent was $3,000 per month. I cannot afford to move to a different part of the city to give my daughter an opportunity to be considered for admission to an exam school. It's absurd that this is the only path open to us. If this policy is meant to level the playing field, then admission rates by tiers and by kids' points and without points should be similar. Thank you. And someone please contact me. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Kamani James.
Well, hello. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Kamani James. I am a former BPS graduate, currently in my junior year at Columbia University, and I am a resident of Dorchester. I have family members currently attending Boston Latin Academy who've communicated to me that BLA's new tardy and attendance rules are absolute and repressive. Students that come in after 7:20 a.m. are considered tardy and will receive, quote, tardy detention with limited conditions for an excused tardy. Section 3C of BLA's new attendance policy states that unexcused absences may include, quote, babysitting, and goes on to read that, quote, illness of members of an extended family or conflicts with parents' work schedule should be viewed as unacceptable excuses for absences, end quote. Now, whether or not this is a City of Boston policy that allows BLA to implement this or exclusively a BLA rule is irrelevant. This is disturbing. There are students who take care of their siblings, students who take care of their parents, students who have to work late hours to provide for themselves and their families, all while completing hours of homework. These are things that can reasonably make a student tardy or even absent for a day. I was one of those students. I have friends who were those students. I'm sure some of you here can also relate. We are stuck in a pattern of implementing punitive, reactionary rules against students rather than being proactive and actually giving them the support and resources they need to enjoy school and learning. And any good educator knows that numerous studies have proven that punitive school discipline does not improve student behavior or academic achievement. It actually does the opposite. Life is messy and it's imperfect. When are we going to stop adhering to white supremacist notions of perfection? Not everyone is going to show up on time all the time. That's not how the world works, and it's not how college works either. These new policies are deplorable and egregious, and I urge the school committee and the superintendent to weigh in and work to abolish them, because the way these schools are allowed to treat their students is extremely concerning, and BPS should not allow it if it really does care about young people. The trend of making decisions for students without students needs to die. Worry less about kids showing up on time and more about providing them with a good education to begin with. I hope you all will look into this. And I also want to take the time to uplift the previous testimonies that have been made tonight about BPS's history of racism. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair Robinson, that concludes our speakers for general public comment. Chair, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan, and thanks you to those of you who spoke this evening and shared your perspective. Your testimony is very important to us. Our first action item is the payment of membership dues to the Council of Great City Schools for school year 2023-2024 in the amount of $46,746. The Council of Great City Schools brings together 78 of the nation's largest urban public school systems in a coalition dedicated to improving student outcomes. I'll now open it up to the committee for questions and comments. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. So if there is no discussion, I'll now entertain a motion to approve the payment of membership dues to the Council of Great City Schools for school year 2023-2024 in the amount of $46,746 as presented. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Mr. Cadet Hernandez,
Yes.
Ms. Lima Barbosa,
Yes.
Ms. Polanco Garcia, Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson.
Yes.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next action item is grants for approval totaling $5,842,243. I'll now open it up to the committee for questions and comments. Dr. Alkins.
Yes, so just as a as a comment, I'm going to continue just to speak on this in terms of our responsibility and governance as a board, that what I'm seeing or what I saw in this entire grants package were all new grants. So thinking about that, they're not necessarily beginning all with preliminary data for us to really look at. But what I would expect is that in the next year, which most of them I think are for about a year, that we would be hearing a report on all of our grants packages we received. The reports will be available on such and such a date. What it's probably more beneficial to us as a committee is to actually have presentation updates on each of these programs so that we can see where progress is, where it isn't. And if there isn't progress, we can at least understand why certain things, what were the roadblocks, what were the challenges. And even as a committee, we can strategically think together around where do we go from here, or what you all are thinking of in terms of rationale. That's the first thing. And then just a question, particularly on one grant, which is the emergency management planning grant. I was just very curious as to the first goal, where it says that if you're able to better support students, you're expecting to see an increase in classroom performance by about 25 and 40% more in family participation. I'm just curious as to how you're measuring that in terms of what constitutes classroom performance, and what are we using as a metric for participation.
Mr. Cooter's here, and Superintendent, before Mr. Cooter, did you want to say something?
I did. So Dr. Alkins, absolutely. What we will be doing is, as we structure the presentations, where there's a grant that's part of that. So I'll give you, for instance, if we're doing student support and we're doing a presentation on attendance and other kinds of student support services, we can include something on the McKinney-Vento, just as a way to be able to integrate the grants into the appropriate area. That probably will make a lot more sense than just kind of rapid fire going down the grants. So I just wanted to check that approach with you to make sure, because that's what we were intending to do. And then I think either Chief Cooter or I see that Rick Durrani is on this, and I believe he is on, would have some additional details to Dr. Alkins' question, specifically about the grant.
I apologize, Superintendent. Actually, Chief Coakley Grice is on to talk about that, and I just saw she her. camera, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her.
Okay, great.
Good evening again. So, but that particular grant that was made available to us last year to apply, but unfortunately, because of our capacity, we weren't able to apply for that grant. So if that grant comes up again this year, we'll be able to, with our new increase in our emergency management team, we'll be able to better evaluate that. Then we'll be able to report out on those specificalities of that grant.
Okay, this is in the grant package, Chief, for the school committee to vote on. This is the emergency management planning grant that currently has Director Durrani listed as the point of contact. That's the one they're looking at.
Okay. Let me review with him again real quick, and I'll check back in 1 second.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And this is Yvonne McCray, Director of Grants. May I interject? We will, thank you, Superintendent. We will be having outcomes reports for all of the grants. We're closing the grants now by the end of September, and each program manager will be able to complete outcomes reports for the grants. So you will be getting outcomes reports eventually before the close of this year.
Great. Thank you, Yvonne.
Are there any other questions around grants before we move on? Okay, if there's no further discussion, I will now entertain a motion to approve the grants as presented. Is there a motion? No.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion or objection to the motion? Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Mr. Cadet Hernandez,
Yes.
Ms. Lima Barbosa,
Yes.
Ms. Polanco Garcia, Mr. Tran,
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill,
Yes.
Ms. Robinson.
Yes.
The grants are approved unanimously.
Thank you. Our first report this evening is a revised Madison Park admissions policy proposal. You'll recall that on May 24th, the superintendent's team presented a proposal for a new admissions policy for Madison Park that meets the state's requirement for vocational technical schools. Committee members raised concerns that the proposed policy had the potential to create unintentional barriers for our students and families. We asked the admissions team to revise the policy and make adjustments to simplify the application process while still ensuring that students know what Madison Park offers and that they want to attend vocational technical high school. The team engaged with stakeholders over the summer, and tonight they are here to present a revised policy back to the school committee. Before I turn it over to the team, I want to invite the superintendent to give introductory remarks. I'd also like to remind everyone to please speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So just thank you to the committee for, I think, giving the the application committee just more thought about what could potentially be a barrier for a student. I think what they've been able to kind of synthesize will be something that will meet the DESE requirement for us having an application process, which is what we do need to have for a vocational tech school. And at the same time, be something very reasonable for a student to accomplish. So with that, I will turn it over for the presentation by the committee.
Thank you, Superintendent Skipper, and good evening, Chair Robinson, members of the committee, and members of the community.
Tonight, we will present the revised Madison Park Technical Vocational High School admissions policy. This policy is in alignment with the Mass state regulations that all career technical vocational education schools have an admissions policy, as well as recommendations from the school's intervention team. During the presentation, the team will highlight revisions based on the feedback given at the May 24th school committee meeting. At this time, I will turn this presentation over to Mr. Jason Samaha, accompanied by his colleagues, Mr. Perino Watson, Ms. Lorinda Briggs, Ms. Priscilla Almanaz, and Ms. Satina Wright. Jason, take it on.
All right, thank you so much. Good evening. Just as a reminder, my name is Jason Sma. I'm an English teacher at Madison Park, and I'm part of the committee that came up with this admissions policy. So, as you recall, as people have said before, the basic two reasons for the policy is one is it fulfills the DESE regulations. And then the second part is that we want to make sure that every student who enrolls at Madison Park is making an informed decision before they attend the school. I think it's important to note that students in 9th and 10th grade spend a quarter of their time in vocational programming, and 11th and 12th graders spend half of their time in vocational programming. And I think it's really important and we really feel it's a significant enough difference in education that kids coming here need to know what's happening. The original proposal, as part of the original proposal, we had an artifact. I'm sorry, let me start again. So students were asked to complete an artifact that demonstrated their interest in vocational education, as well as get 2 letters of support. We also included a lottery system that will be implemented if more students wanted to attend Madison Park than we had seats. It's also, I think, important to notice that we didn't create this policy in a vacuum. As people have said before, we engage with family, students, staff, community, BPS central office, DESE in creating this policy. At the May 24th school committee meeting, we heard 3, I think, different but sort of related issues with the policy that we presented, namely that there would have a disabling impact on multilingual learners and students with disabilities, as well as presenting possible barriers for our most vulnerable students, and then there didn't seem to be enough counseling or assistance or support for students during the application process. So, thinking about that advice, which I think when we originally began the creation of this policy, we were looking to create the most inclusive, equitable policy that we could. And I think having that conversation, that feedback really helped us sort of, I think, narrow in on how do we still meet our goals of DESE regulations and informed decision-making, but also, remove as many barriers as possible. So we decided that it would make sense to remove the artifact and the 2 letters of support. And we're proposing to replace that with a single statement of interest that describes the student's interest in CVTE, which is Career Vocational Technical Education, and then how they believe Madison Park will help the student achieve those goals. Students can submit their SOI, which we're calling the statement of interest, in multiple formats. They could write it, they could create a video, they could put it in a slideshow, or they could schedule an interview. In addition, what we decided was that in order to address the idea of not enough supports is to create informational drop-in sessions, both virtual and in person, where there'll be translation, interpretation. There'll be people from our special ed office, from our multilingual learners. We're gonna make sure that students can complete this in their home language, and then have as many exemplars and facts as we can for that. And so we feel by making these two sort of revisions to the policy, we've met our goals of the DESE requirements, and it's showing that kids are making an informed decision before they enroll at Madison Park. And that's the end of the presentation. So thank you again for your time.
Okay. Thank you for the report, and thank you to your team for your work on this proposal. I'll now open it up to the committee for questions and comments.
Chair, can
Ms.
I
Lima Barbosa.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was really exciting to see that you all heard the feedback that the committee, my committee members had shared at the last meeting that I wasn't here, especially when it comes to the different formats that a student can actually submit their application. As you know, not many students, writing is not their strength, but they are able to create a video, they're able to create presentations, and even perform better when they're actually being interviewed on a one-on-one or with a group of like a panel in front of them. So I really appreciate that you all are emphasizing that there are different ways and manners that students can show their potential, can show their interest. So I just want to comment on that. One thing that I'm really excited is that they're able to do it in their native language. And that's something that will also amplify that they are great students and they will contribute to the Madison Park community as a whole. I remember when I came from Cape Verde, Madison was not presented necessarily as an option. If it was mostly because, oh, there's a lot of Cape Verdean students there, but I don't think at the time the team at BPS informed my parents or myself about the vocational, the technical, all the different classes that I could actually learn how to do hair. And my mom is a Madison Park alum, but even her herself just assumed that the Welcome Center would inform me of these information. So knowing that this admission policy is actually going to really amplify how unique Madison is as a school in the district will definitely allow students to make a more informed decision and really see what are their options here. So I just want to make a comment on that. And then my only question, it relates to how is the district amplifying or making, outreaching to families about the policy, right? And also doing a better marketing of what Madison Park has to offer. Are we doing community meetings? Are we going to the neighborhoods? I don't know if work has been done already, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about that in terms of the community engagement to inform folks about this change and the school.
So I don't, through you, Chair, I don't know if Director Silvio would like to comment on it, but I can say that one of the things that we are going to work to do is to really introduce for our 6th graders and our 7th graders and our 8th graders a sense of what vocational education is, what the different offerings are. Really just try to do a lot more with our middle schoolers than has been done in the past. We'll work with Madison on particular outreach for how we can get students in to actually see the campus and actually get excited about it. I think in Madison's proposal, they would like to go to a 7 to 12 as part of their design. And I think while the 7th and 8th grade wouldn't be formal CTE grades, the idea there is that there'd be more opportunity to integrate the vocational and the technical aspects into the everyday curriculum as a way to help students get excited about what's possible. So this will be something that we'll be turning a lot of attention to, both working with Madison and staff, but also I think across the secondary office into the other high schools.
Thank you, Superintendent. I have just a follow-up real quick. I know you mentioned engaging the current students that are at BPS. Are there any efforts in terms of newcomers? And I'm not just speaking about, Cape Verdean families, but of course, any of our immigrant families that might be sending their kids here for a better education. So just wanted to hear a little bit about that, if there's a more intentional way of how we are informing them about this opportunity as well.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the things at the secondary level in general, but certainly with CT work at Madison, is to make sure that the Welcome Center, as students are registering, has lots of information so that students know what options are. This is an area where I don't think we've necessarily either had the resource or put the resource to it. And yet it's such an important part of how students are making that decision, particularly because many of our high schools start in 7th grade now. And so that's really a big decision. Here, I think really inviting the student and the parent into understanding what they have to do relative to admissions for Madison, that'll be a key piece of training our welcoming staff as well.
If I could speak a little bit on it. My name is Prino Watson. I'm one of the vocational directors at Madison Park. One of the things that we have been doing in the past, even up till current, we have road shows where we go to the different schools and we let our students go and speak about the programs and the things that they build. And we also invite students to the school for tours, and we give them, all the information and videos, anything that we can do to get them to really see that they're looking to get into a vocational school. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've always had. And I think we're kind of getting over that obstacle now, is that a lot of the parents are starting to realize that we're a vocational school, not just a regular high school. And I think if we can get as much assistance as we can, especially from the district, getting it out there. And that's a great question. How do we do it? From the inside, we do a lot, but getting the district to help, as Superintendent Skipper said, that secondary would make a huge difference on the students picking a school because they want to be in a vocational program.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Cardet Hernandez.
One, thank you for coming back to us. And I know I raised a lot of the concerns last time we were together, and I appreciate you for hearing it and recognizing the sort of unintended consequences of the former proposal. And this one seems to really solve some of those problems while also making sure that students who want to be there are there and feel like they're part of something really special. So thank you. A question I think probably more appropriate for the superintendent. I have three. One is, does this now mean that students will not be administratively placed at Madison? And I know we had talked about, I think it was 30% of the population right now is administratively placed. Will there be a moratorium on that policy, and what would that look like and when?
Yeah, those are the things that we have to work out once the admissions policy is passed. I think we're looking district-wide at administrative assignment and what that looks like, and what might be some alternatives to that in terms of outreach to families and students who aren't selecting or knowing how to select a school. So there will need to be, in companionship with the policy, some kind of moratorium or streamlining of this, but it has to be done in a coordinated fashion.
Yeah, thank you for that. It seems like a big connection, obviously, at least as an observer, right? Like there either is an application or there isn't. And if so, it seems counterintuitive to then administratively place students there. And so then I guess at the same time, are we doing any analysis around the enrollment implications for Madison, I guess in two pieces. One, as we talk about an expansion with a recognition that 30% of those students currently wouldn't qualify for that type of experience. And there may be students there who were not administratively placed who also would not have qualified. I'm just sort of curious how what sort of projections the team is doing and thinking about the expansion, but also thinking about sort of high school options for ay Dios mío, what year is it now? The 24-25 year, but what will be a process students are engaging with in the next few months?
Right. So I think as we've kind of spoken about during the course of the year, I think helping students to understand what the options are is kind of our first step across the secondary field. We used to do a great deal of promotion around this with the high school showcases and so forth. We need to kind of get back into that because it's such a critical transition. I think specific to Madison, and I don't want to go too deep into this because it's tied into more of like the overall kind of secondary design. But in the specific case of Madison, I think, even like the numbers that were put out there, it all really depends on the number of programs that are being offered. I think one of the things that Madison is really excited to do in the design phase is to think about what are the other kinds of CTE programs or VOC programs that they currently don't offer that they could. Every time you offer more programming, that takes space up. So I think the 2,200 number that got floated out there, I think, that's going to depend at day's end on what happens with the programming. I also think it takes into effect this 7th and 8th grade cohorting, which right now for Madison doesn't exist. So determining what numbers those would be in 7th and 8th grade, and then understanding that even in 9th, there might be some transitioning out and some transitioning in. There's a lot of this that has to be figured out around the enrollment. And we'll start looking at those numbers, looking at who's choosing, who isn't. It's exciting to think that we will have an actual admissions policy in to be able to actually get that data back from.
And the plan is that this would be the policy for 24-25.
Yes.
So I hear that. I would just like wave the flag again. I have a sneaking suspicion, while a great policy, that it will have major implications on high school enrollment at the school. And, as we're having conversations about carryover money and schools being held harmless and all of those things, like this could deeply reduce the number of students there and then the scale and size of the school, while we're simultaneously having a conversation about future expansion. And I don't know, I just hope we're like thinking through, back to unintended consequences, the unintended consequences of potentially reducing the enrollment pool by 30% in the same conversation we're talking about expanding it by almost double, I guess.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the admissions policy is kind of the first step, and the implications that will have in terms of the current pool and enrollment. Then I think there's this larger question around the design and what's to come for Madison, and then that's kind of a second phase. So, I mean, to your point, it's, the stuff that we're looking at and need to look at. But it really, I think for them, the admissions policy is kind of the, one, we need to do it from a DESE standpoint. But secondly, I think that, I really do commend this group, because they've really been extremely thoughtful in this and are very committed to having quality CTE and VOC offerings and helping students make healthy choices and informed choices, and parents in that process. So I think this is step one. And then once it's passed, then we kind of start with looking at enrollment and other kinds of unintended consequence, how to mitigate that, when that would happen, how does that coincide with the budget?
Yeah, I know I'm out of time. I hear you. I think it might just be a both and. I think it's step one, and at the same time, we should probably be taking on a step 1.5, because I think there are major budget implications for the school with a 30% loss in enrollment that I don't think we probably need to wait for the data to come in to know that there will be a major hit to enrollment if you are not administratively placing kids there. So like, we don't need to be surprised by the news. Like, we can project probably somewhat concretely a window of what that would be, and then the sort of future planning that's necessary, so there's not some major shock to the community. This policy potentially means X, Y, and Z, and that is different than a school who's experiencing enrollment decline that may be a surprise. And so that they're planning in a time that is uncertain, but coming from a place of surprise, where in this situation, we're sort of building what will be that probable truth.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a both and. I also do think that if we can do a much better job of helping parents understand what's possible and students what's possible, which I think in general is one of the issues behind administrative assignment district-wide, then I think we may not see those 30 percentiles. So, I mean, I think those are the things that we need to work toward.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Are there other? Mr. O'Neill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank the district for listening to the committee. We had a lot of feedback when this was first presented about putting more obstacles in front of our students. And clearly, this new proposal threads the needle between the state saying CTE schools have to have an admission policy. And quite frankly, you know, what I hear when I'm out at Madison Park talking with the administrators and the teachers who very much, and the alumni who are obviously very vocal and love the school dearly, that they want students there who want to be there. And so having students express interest one way or another, and as Ms. Lima Barbosa pointed out, and so great to hear your voice being represented. Thank you for that already of, you know, the language considerations. This points out the need for having great communications to our students of what their opportunities are and understand the differences between our schools. We have so many pockets of excellence all around the district that we just have to get better at communicating it at an earlier basis to our students so they understand what their possibilities are. So but I appreciate the district listening to our feedback from before and coming back with a very substantially revised proposal.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? My only comment is, again, I thank school for going back and looking at this, but I think the issue is really on us and our education of our middle school kids right now, since it's a high school, making sure that more students have actual opportunities of going to Madison and seeing what it's like, so that we have a much better informed group of families seeing this as another opportunity. I don't know whether we have one of our fifth quarter programs has anything to do with Madison, but hearing how excited kids got from a wide variety of opportunities, we need to be selling our own opportunities also. So I think the more that we can make sure people have an opportunity, then they can make a decision. But again, thank you for what you've all done to make this a better possibility for more of our students to make a choice. Want to thank you again all for your work on this, and the committee looks forward to taking action on the proposal at our next meeting prior to the state's October 1st deadline. Thank you all. Our final report this evening is the superintendent's summative performance evaluation for school year 2023. Evaluating the superintendent is among the primary responsibilities of the school committee. You'll recall that Superintendent Skipper presented her self-evaluation to the committee at a special meeting on July 26th. Since that time, members have completed their individual evaluations, and Dr. Alkins and Mr. O'Neill have compiled the results into one summative evaluation that they will share with us this evening. I'm grateful to them for leading this important process. Before turning it over to Dr. Alkins, I think it's important to put the superintendent's evaluation in context. Superintendent Skipper has been with the district for 11 months and was very honest with us from the beginning about all the work the district would require to get back on track, and that this work wouldn't happen overnight and can't be done by one person alone. While tonight we're evaluating the superintendent, I want to ask each committee member, members of the superintendent's leadership team, members of the public and community activists to do their own self-reflecting too. I believe our superintendent can do incredible things for our students, but she cannot do it alone. We all play a role in the success or failure of our district. I thank Superintendent Skipper for her willingness to jump in, roll her sleeves up, and get right to work. We're in this with you. Your success is our children's success. And I know if we're all working together, we can give our students everything they deserve. I'll now turn it over to Dr. Alkins.
Thank you. And good evening, fellow committee members. Good evening, BPS staff, folks who are still joining us from the district. My name is Stephen Alkins. As a committee member, I'm excited to be here, and my role has been in more of a support capacity as I learn the process of giving reports and giving readouts to our committee. But I do want to acknowledge a couple of things. First, I want to just say for those people who are listening who might be visually impaired, I am a brown colored man who is wearing a gray shirt. So just to acknowledge those people who might be on the call listening. Also, I'd like to thank Vice Chair O'Neill for his support and really just his insight and thinking about how to make this process a lot easier. I'd also like to thank Liz Sullivan and Megan Costello for supporting the amalgamation of all of the information from our fellow committee members' evaluations and really pulling out a lot of the major themes. And last, I would like to thank Superintendent Skipper for her commitment, jumping into the work, and also just the nature of having an evaluation that is public. And I know that that's not the norm of many positions. And so certainly the commitment to our district, the commitment to our students and our staff is something that certainly I want to recognize. So I will share my screen. Where are we? And I just want to make sure that, can everyone see my screen? I just want to make sure. Okay. So, before we jump into the evaluation itself, it's important to put things into context in terms of what our committee responsibilities are. And so really, we define the vision, mission, and goals of the Boston Public School. And so for those people who may not be unaware, we can break this out into 5 major goals. One being having foundational reading skills by grade 3. We also have a goal that states that multilingual learners will demonstrate growth in English language proficiency. Third, we commit that students with disabilities will thrive in appropriate settings. Fourth, our goal is that students will be able to critically think and master math, science, and literacy. And our 5th goal is that students will graduate high school prepared to direct their future. And so by extension, when we really think about this, these goals necessitate really deep strategic work around eliminating opportunity and achievement gaps, identifying and addressing historic racist practices and inequities, promoting and enacting authentic student and family engagement, building community partnerships based on reciprocity and accountability, fostering diverse and effective staffing policies and practices, and providing trauma-informed, student-centered, social, emotional, and physical supports. And so these priorities are also supported through the establishment and the monitoring of the annual operating budget. So when we think about the narrative of our goals, we're also implying that there is the numerical narrative, which is reflected in our budget. As a committee, we are also charged with hiring and managing and evaluating the superintendent based upon this individual.
We've lost you. Cannot hear you. not know what is happening. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, it appears we've lost Dr. Elkins.
Yeah,
It appears he shut down his internet and hopefully will be coming right back on.
okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, may I just suggest we take a couple of minutes break, let people stretch, and then we get a chance for Dr. Elkins to get back on the internet. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah, if we could come back in about 2 minutes, thank you.
Great. So Madam Chair. Madam
Yes.
Chair, Dr. Elkins is zooming in via his cell phone because he lost his internet. And so you'll see him here. Hopefully you can hear us, Dr. Elkins, and Ms. Costello will put the presentation up on the screen and forward it when Dr. Elkins asks her to.
Okay, here he is.
There we go. We can see you, Dr. Elkins.
Can see you.
Yes, this will warrant many conversations with Verizon at this point. Yes, we were in the middle of yes. So this bullet point here, I apologize everybody for the interruption. our last responsibility is also setting and reviewing district policies and practices that support student achievement. So again, I think it's worth reiterating to my fellow colleagues that in many ways, the superintendent is an extension of us, and we should consider the evaluation also to some degree an evaluation of ourselves. Next slide, please. To give a sense of the order of evaluation, we have agreed upon certain goals, which we just aligned in the previous slide. But we've also received a self-evaluation from the superintendent at our previous meeting in July. And then during a short period over a couple of weeks, each of us had, as committee members, had the opportunity to review district data, have conversations with the superintendent if necessary, but make our own individual assessments of how the superintendent performed over the past 11 months. And then Vice Chair O'Neill, myself, with the support of Liz Sullivan and Megan Costello, were able to pull together all of those assessments to create a summative assessment. And following this report, we will vote on this summative assessment and the final performance rating. Next slide, please. So to give a sense of that timeline from the previous slide, the presentation of the self-evaluation in July, and then the couple of weeks for our evaluations, and then the summative synthesis. And then on tonight, we are presenting the summative evaluation. And then on the 13th, we will vote on this summative evaluation. Please advance. And so before we get into the different categories, we want to acknowledge a couple of different things. Please click the first. That are different standards that we look at when we are analyzing the superintendent's progress ranges in 4 bins or 4 categories. The first one being instructional leadership, the second being management and operations, the third being family and community engagement, and the fourth being professional culture. And just to speak a little bit about each one, you'll see them posted later, but it is important to note that we define instructional leadership as the ability for our educational leader to promote learning and growth of all students and the success of all staff through a shared vision that makes powerful teaching and learning the central focus of all schooling. In our management and operations, we are defining that as the ability for our superintendent to promote the learning and growth of all students and the success of all staff by ensuring a safe, efficient, and effective learning environment, and using resources to implement appropriate curriculum, staffing, and scheduling. In our third standard, we define family and community engagement by the ability for our superintendent to promote the learning and growth of all students and success of all staff through effective partnership building with families, community organizations, and other stakeholders that support the mission of the school and district. And last, a professional culture standard is defined by our superintendent's ability to promote success of all students by nurturing and sustaining a school culture of reflective practice, high expectations, and continuous learning for staff. Thank you. Thanks. And so to give more insight into how the type of the rubric that we used, what you all are looking at now is the committee's 4-category superintendent evaluation rubric, which we broke out. As you will see in orange, the categories are only 4 categories. based upon DESE standards. But for our district, we adapted this standard to include a fifth category, as you can see in the green text, noting different categories as highly effective, effective or developing, a category of needs improvement, and a category rating of unsatisfactory. Below that, you will also notice that there are numbers corresponding, and this is to provide somewhat of a numerical translation as we thought about ways to really showcase or illustrate the assessment of the superintendent. And so each committee member is required to bin each of the standards and rate the superintendent based upon the BPS unlike rubric. And then at the end, we also included our rating as it would fit back into the DESE standard rubric. Next slide. And so first, of course, we acknowledge that the superintendent came in with an alignment to the goals that we had laid out, and also aligning goals very much thinking about the systemic improvement plan. And so some of those tenets include prioritizing and accelerating the academic performance, strengthening the access to social emotional learning supports, streamlining operations, and ensuring student safety, developing authentic family and community engagement practices, improving internal and external communication with families and staff, increasing accountability for both the central office and for our schools. So next slide, please. And so now we're going to take a deeper dive into each standard and look at how we evaluated the superintendent in each area. So within the area of instructional leadership, which the text there are simply the descriptions as I outlined earlier. And if you click the next button, some of the feedback that we pulled out in terms of common themes that we noted included a strong instructional alignment. We noted that the superintendent did well to build a strong team around her. There were investments that were made in equitable literacy, particularly surrounding multilingual learners and multilingual learners with disabilities. And the numbers for attendance are encouraging despite chronic absenteeism. We found a theme of that there is a focus on the inclusion rollout and also multilingual learners and multilingual learners with disability strategic plans, like with specificity. These are, and I'm sorry, I'll take a step back. That was also a theme that we pulled out as needing work. So focusing on rolling out these plans with more specificity and also turning the attention to staff diversity is very critical and still remains an area of growth and improvement. Also, thinking about an area for growth and improvement also includes the use of the equitable literacy observational tool and also racial equity planning tools utilized with more fidelity and used more efficiently, with data revealing historic and equitable practices that must be shared such that racist practices and systemic biases within the district can be named, and utilizing that conversion to a numerical score. Together, the committee rated the superintendent in this particular area an average score of 3.71 out of 5. Next slide. And one of the things that we wanted to be transparent about is so that you could see the distribution of each response from each member of the committee. So looking at this figure on the left, on the y-axis, what you're looking at is the number of responses. And then on the x-axis, you're looking at the areas of how each individual committee member rated the superintendent within the category of instructional leadership. So 3 members gave the superintendent a rating of developing and or proficient, and also 3 members gave the superintendent a rating of effective, and 1 member rated the superintendent as highly effective in the area of instructional leadership. So this should set the tone for the other distribution charts that you'll see for the other standards. Next slide, please. As we look to management and operations, we note that some of the themes that came out of this include celebrating the new organizational leadership model and the regional support model that will provide more customized support to schools, as well as levels of accountability. We also noted the improvements with staffing, safety, and labor agreements, bringing all of those contracts to date. And thinking about the facility conditions assessment, which is currently ongoing, will be a great opportunity to showcase a new commitment to process like improvement, focusing on cross collaboration and progress monitoring. Additionally, I'd like to also highlight some other themes that came out, thinking about speaking specifically to success on the TransDev contract reforms, looking at ways of measuring staffing progress that we were certainly proud of. And then as we think about areas of growth and improvement in this particular area, the committee as a whole noted certain things, specifically thinking about the need to hire more SEL staff, increasing the access to native language instruction, increasing the focus on facilities and transportation, increasing a focus on safety, improving problem solving when systems break down, reducing and eliminating delays in employee payments, and increasing our sense of urgency specifically around our staffing gaps, and increasing clarity around changes to building utilization. Next slide, please. And so to look at the distribution, as you can see, 1 member rated the superintendent in the area of needs improvement, 1 rated the superintendent in the area of developing for this standard. 4 members rated the superintendent with a value of effective, and 1 rated the superintendent with a value of highly effective. Next slide. As we look at family and community engagement, we noted very much praised BPS and Superintendent Skipper's work for the development of the BPS helpline and really strengthening the communication that goes out to families, and the strengthening of specific school site councils. We also noted that there were some missed opportunities throughout the year for authentic engagement around communication, our timelines, school mergers, decision-making, and really thinking about the power and authority that families really have within the process in engagement. And so as a committee, while we note this, we still engage in strong support for a commitment to move BPS from a place of family and community involvement to being more authentically engaged in processes. And we noted that we want to ensure that the superintendent should continue to ensure equity as a through line, deepen that customer service approach, and continuously measure impact and satisfaction. And some of the other things that I will pull out from my notes include, just making sure I got everything there. No? Yeah, I think I got everything for this particular slide. And as we just look at the distribution, we can see that the majority of school members rated the superintendent in terms of family and community engagement as effective, while 2 members rated the superintendent in the areas of developing and needs improvement. And so the last standard, if we move to the last slide, is one of fostering a professional culture. And so as a strength, we celebrated the superintendent's strong commitment to cultural proficiency, high standards, and continuous learning. We praised the superintendent's ability for stabilizing the principal core and continuing to build relationships and measure impact. And we encourage, as an area of growth, the assessment of all changes, their efficacy, more specifically their accountability, and how these ideas must be brought to the forefront. And other areas of growth and improvement include the need to deepen relationships with an evolving school committee, really thinking about how we're surveying internal communications and really measuring the effectiveness of the professional development. And as we see the distribution, about 1 member rated the superintendent as highly effective, and the remainder of the committee rated the superintendent in the area of professional culture, split evenly between developing and also effective or proficient. Please, next. And so the overall rating, as we collectively synthesize the data, is that we really believe that the superintendent in her first year achieves a rating of proficient, and noting also the many areas of necessary growth and development. This, in many ways, committee members identified this as a tough evaluation, particularly because it is in many ways an infrastructure year. We understand also the limitations with regard to being able to modify the budget from last year, and understanding that some of those changes were some of the changes that Superintendent Skipper may have wanted to implement may not have been able to be done with the limitations to the budget. However, we provided a wealth, I think, of feedback to the superintendent, as well as our continued commitment to support like her and support the outcomes that need to come forth within the district. Next slide. And so this is a summary slide that that showcases the distributions across each standard in a very different way. So just looking at the raw data, like here in a different way. Yeah. And next slide. And so the summative evaluation, as it's placed back into the DESE rubric, but also thinking about our own rubric, here is also the distribution for the overall rating. And so as we think about what are the areas of development, we understand that areas of strength would include taking the steps to understand the challenges that are faced by the district through its external reports, and working in very different areas to affect change. And as an example of this, sort of taking a little bit of liberty here of thinking about how we're using our equity-centered tools to actually name systemic biases contributing to the challenges of eliminating academic achievement gaps and opportunity gaps, and really thinking about the ways that we're assessing this, and really thinking about how we're doing this for our most vulnerable student populations. As an area, also an area of strength, really thinking about developing that regional network model and the systems for improvement really supports a variety of different areas, including curriculum and instruction, and understanding that we need a lot more detail as we move forward throughout the year in this. But again, celebrating the huge wins in labor relations and the transportation infrastructure that we've seen in the past year. Also, we celebrate the overall culture of high expectations, clearly articulating the values and striving for continuous improvement while being culturally responsive and inclusive. Next slide. And while we think about these things, again, there is much needed, there's much needed growth and improvement across a range of areas. Really speaking about authentic family and community involvement and moving that to a place of authentic community engagement that, again, interrogates power dynamics and really thinks about shifting power within decision-making within the district. Two, we really hope that that the superintendent continues to develop buy-in on a shared mission and commitment to high standards from all staff, with a shared focus on improving student outcomes and closing those achievement gaps, particularly for our most vulnerable populations, and using data to drive that impact, and really transparency within that data, more specifically as we share it with the public and among each other, and fostering that customer service like mentality. And of course, last, developing a coherent master plan that is shared with the public, that is fair, that is equitable, and is understandable, particularly by those who are most impacted. And so for discussion, we wonder, are these the right goals that we should be moving toward? And another thing, I guess, worthy of note, and Vice Chair O'Neill, please correct me if I am wrong, but we do encourage people to access our individual evaluations so that there is a sense of people can understand how we each saw like the evaluation over the course of the last 11 months. And so, as stated before, on September 13th, we vote on the final performance rating, and during the fall, together, the school committee and the superintendent will co-construct goals for this academic year. And with that, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I'm willing to take any questions and comments on or just foster discussion around this.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Alkins and Mr. O'Neill, for the report and for leading this important process. I'll now open it up to the committee for questions and comments. Are there any questions, any comments? Mr. O'Neill?
First of all, I want to thank Dr. Elkins for that incredibly thorough presentation and thoughtful presentation in stepping all of us through that. I do note for members of the public who may wonder, Ms. Lima Barbosa was not a member of the committee during this process, so this is new work for her. But Mr. Mehta was a part of this process, and his evaluation was included as well. So I thank you for the thoughtful approach that all members took on this, and also the superintendent, both for her self-evaluation and being available for members to call as we thought through what we read, what we saw in the DESE standards, feedback we all individually were getting from members of the community and public over the past couple of months, and tying that together with our own observations over the year from school committee meetings, visiting schools, talking with staff, parents, etc. So As Dr. Elkins mentioned, every single piece of this are public documents, and so including the individual member evaluations, so they will all be posted. Along with, there is a summative evaluation that includes both a narrative and a number of the bullet points that Dr. Elkins pulled out. So that will be available for all as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
And thank you, Superintendent, for your cooperation and thoughtfulness in the approach to this as well.
Mr. Cardet Hernandez. You're muted.
I said really profound things that I will not repeat, but thank you both for leading the process. Is it possible to pull up the slide that's for discussion during the discussion?
The last slide.
I think it's the second to last or the third to last.
Okay.
Because that might just make this part easier. Perfect. Yeah, it's that, the next one. The goals here. Is this the time where we're talking about this, right? That's the point. Am I following this right?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess 3 things. I think these are probably right, but I'm just adding to the chaos of it all as we figure out what's next. I think for me, there's a few standout places. One is just around like the intentional use of data. And I think this will matter in a few places. It'll matter in decision making. I think I'm sort of channeling Dr. Elkins as we think about even financial decisions we were talking about earlier this evening, right? Like, how are we using data to make decisions? I'm even going back to the Madison Park enrollment policy conversation that we're to, like, how are we doing that, and sort of where is data in lockstep with policy decisions, and as well as in our own goal setting. And I think this will matter as we build out in collaboration with the superintendent her goals for the year, so that they are data driven and that we're creating that expectation universally, but also that like our conversations, our policy decisions continue to be rooted in data. And so I don't know, I would like to somehow see that as a place of growth and opportunity for us. I think the second bullet, or the first bullet rather, around move from a place of family and community involvement to authentic and family community engagement, I would want us to get a little bit tighter here, because I think this is one of those moments where I think we're saying the same thing and it can quickly become jargon. It's like, what do we really want to see process-wise? I'm making things up, but I think this is the sort of the place for actual growth, or we're going to still be in this purgatory of community engagement and family engagement. Is it around, I don't know, boilerplate timelines around major policy decisions? Is it a commitment to a certain amount of engagement and communication around policy decisions? Is it town halls? I don't know, but I think it's too vague for it to become actionable. And I think you can even see in our own ratings, like we're in the same domain as a board. You know, some of us are seeing it as a needs improvement and some of us think it's highly effective. And I think narrowing the focus of where we think continued growth is in a much cleaner, actionable, measurable way might actually help us, I don't know, engage in conversations a little bit more deeply, and be able to track progress in a way that feels right for all of us. And then I guess the last comment that I have here is just around the master plan, and I was just taking notes. Like, I think it's about It's this, and there's a sort of plus. It's like, it's a master plan that aligns to existing and future enrollment and increases availability of high quality options across the district. And I think that that becomes more like, I won't be satisfied if it's just like, now we have a plan, right? Like, it has to be something that recognizes the reality of our current state of play and is like laser focused on high quality options. And, you know, and I'll stop in a second. It like that will then, I think, tie back to other problems of practice that we experience in a school choice system, whether that's families having choice when they are in a school without a certified teacher, or families having clearer choice when their school is identified as failing. Just like making sure that that high quality piece and the choice within it is part of the way that we're thinking about master planning, as well as the sort of enrollment implications of it all. Any questions? All right.
No, I would say no questions in terms of what you've laid out. What I would say is, yes, and particularly on the first one with regard to family and community involvement, I think it's all of the above, which again makes it very hard to put in a report, because the truth of the matter is that there's a lot of work to do with, one, sharing information around timelines, sharing information. For me, authentic community engagement necessitates a conversation around power dynamics of who gets to choose and how much, and again, it's like, how much are we sharing with the district, you know, in order to make certain decisions? When do those decisions like happen? Who's included in those conversations in terms of who's invited to them? So I think it's all of the above, which again, yeah, it makes it so vague of a mission or of a goal. But I certainly agree that on a case by case basis, there needs to be more specificity with regard to how we are defining what engagement is within that context. I completely agree there.
I appreciate that, and it will tie back to for me too, the real authentic piece of it then is that it's like that we're sharing the reasons behind decision making or even proposals. I think we felt this with the O'Brien and Madison announcement, where it's like, well, what's the data that is informing this decision?
Yes.
But like oftentimes it's like announcement without precision around why. And so then in turn, it's like, you know, I have a 6-year-old and it's like, I'm always answering why. and they're fair questions more often than not. Like, help me understand the rationale behind this thinking. And that's part of it. It's like, and maybe I'm making meaning in the moment with everyone. Like maybe that is part of it, where it's like part of really engaging people authentically is helping them understand the rationale behind the decision. And it's not just a big presser, right? Like it's
Absolutely.
understanding the data behind decision making or even proposal changes. And I think that's a real opportunity for us to do better and in turn help people feel better in the process.
Yeah.
Dr. Elkins, is it okay if I give a kind of a yes and to your answer to Mr. Cardet Hernandez as well?
It's a discussion, sure.
Okay, great. I just want to point out, so thank you, Mr. Cardet Hernandez, for adding flavor to each of those. And very important. And in fact, Dr. Elkins and I did discuss this, and we discussed it with the superintendent, the need for her evaluation for next year, which kind of kicks off as soon as we finish this one, having goals that are more SMART goals, right? Measurable, attainable. And so like some of the things you were just talking about authentic family engagement, about, you know, is it town halls, is it this and that? So I think the process that the chair plans upon starting, I think Dr. Elkins had in the slide of it said in the fall. I think the chair has scheduled a public retreat for all of us in early October, and that will be, you know, we've finished the evaluation. So then it's like, okay, so what are the goals for the next year that we're agreeing to, and how are they SMART goals? And so how do we dig deeper on each of these? I think this slide in front of us was more summative of what people had done in each of their engagements. So try to put it together, but agreeing completely that if we use this as a starting point for the conversations in the fall about next year's goals, we need to get much more specific in each of these or others that we add that are much more SMART goals, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll say, since I'm still the only one with my hand up, is, and then I will be done for the evening, is the only other thing I think is missing in this, and it will, again, just inform our future conversation or our goals, is something that's also really student specific. And this goes back to even during my own evaluation, like, and I don't know, I guess it'll keep going back to data, like, what do we really want to see change in terms of outcomes? And I think we have to say it, and it can't just be platitudes around like closing the achievement gap. It's like we can actually measure tangible things, and like both things can be real. That can be the North Star, and that's where we're going to get. But like, how are we going to get there year over year? Because we're not just turning a lens. So it's like, what is the real conversation we're having about student progress within a year? And what is the assessment that we are tying that back to? And I think that goes to what you said, Mr. O'Neill, like it will be about creating actual SMART goals that we're measuring progress against.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I might speak to, I mean, I can only speak, you know, like for myself. I know that was something I think particularly in standard 1, you know, that I thought about in terms of the elimination or the monitoring of the achievement and the opportunity gaps, and just really thinking about not just the MAP assessments, but what else are we using that's going to show progress, because we have not seen it improve over, I don't know, X amount of years. And so really, what are the things that are inhibiting that? And that also really, for me, dovetails also how we're effectively utilizing things like the equitable literacy observational tool. How is that going to sort of help us identify where those gaps might be in instructional practice specifically? And then thinking about the racial equity planning tool, I'm certainly a fan of that, but using it to truly identify where the historic and systemic biases have prevented those gaps from being closed, and just what are the findings from that? Because if we're unable to really name what those biases are, then we're not going to address it at all. And I'm hoping that we summarize that data that we're getting, and then we can start to make progress, I think, also like to the classroom, like as well. Yeah, so I think that's just one part of it, you know. But I think, I mean, even in all of this, you know, I certainly again want to echo that all of this is a reflection of us too. And again, this is us also, this discussion is also us showing support for the superintendent, and just that, you know, we're behind it. I think we all agree with the notion of the stability in the district, and the need for it, and that we're going to continue pushing ourselves, and you know, beyond the scope of platitudes, as you know, as you're talking about, you know, Member Cardette Hernandez.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for the discussion. I feel it's just the beginning of a broader discussion as we begin to look at the work we all need to work together to do as we move forward over this next year. I too saw this really very much as a foundational year, and I think sometimes my own thoughts about this can be a little bit different, because I probably speak to the superintendent every day, multiple times a day, or at least during the week, and sometimes have a very different sense about what the the work of the district is what we may think and want it to be, and then what it actually ends up being. And to be honest, sometimes I'm amazed at how much does get done because of how many distractions also get in the way of the very methodical things we would like to accomplish. And I know that there are lots and lots of questions about things that we need to do, can do, and must do, and at the same time be realistic about what is accomplishable and how we can together identify the most critical things that we really want us all to be laser focused on and get the whole district to be laser focused on, because moving our kids forward is most critical. But I want to thank you all for all you've done thus far, and to know that we have a lot of work to do moving forward. I want to turn it over to the superintendent for some remarks as well.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, thank you all for just lots of insights, suggestions, thoughts. I think you have my full commitment since I took this position, and as long as I'm in it, you will always have it. But for my team as well, that we are very much about continuous improvement and providing our district with a stability and a moving forward that it hasn't had the opportunity to have in a while. I would appreciate and welcome always the opportunity to work with each of you as much as possible to help you learn the district with us as well. I think it is a different district, certainly from the time I was here prior. And so I think it's relearning things, it's learning things anew. Would love to do that with you, because I do think it's important to do that together so that the goals that we create, to the chair's point, are realistic, and they are pointed in the north direction that we want them to be for our students. So I'm looking forward to the year ahead, to getting better at the things that we began, to start working on things that we didn't have opportunity to last year. I think it's a unique situation. It was actually, it became very starkly unique as I get into this, to realize the boundaries in which the district finds itself, relative to the SIP plan, relative to what is pretty extensive recommendations by the Council of Great City Schools that for the most part we are taking on, to strategic plans, to the work of task force and what the task force would like. And so I think that there's a lot of good thinking in a lot of different directions, and the only way that we'll make the progress we need to is to find ways to align that and not overwhelm the field, and really focus on the things that are going to be the greatest levers of change for us. So, we need to build BPS as an enterprise that it is. It is not a small district, and most of its systems, as I shared with you during last year, really need to be rebuilt. And so we got through some of them, certainly not all of them. And that will be the work to continue this year, while at the same time we're forging ahead with the things that, we've talked about of importance here, relative to the work with family and community, relative to the deep work that we owe our multilingual learners with and without disabilities, and our special education students, and our Black and Brown students for whom the district hasn't been able to serve. So in many ways, when I say this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, though some people see it as challenge, which it is, but it is also opportunity. And that opportunity extends to you as a body as well, to work with us as a team. And it also extends to the community. And that, that is broad. I mean, this is not, given that a year ago, there were conversations of takeover in this district. I think we're at a different place of having provided foundation and stability that we can actually build on. And I think that's amazingly hopeful and wonderful. I am extremely results oriented, as my team knows. And so we will take to heart every recommendation that you have, and we will work toward that into each of them. So I just look forward to the partnership and to the continued feedback, and most importantly, for our district to grow in the right direction.
Thank you, Superintendent, and thank you all. The committee is scheduled to vote on the summative evaluation and the superintendent's performance ratings for school year 2022-2023 at our next meeting. Mr. O'Neill.
Yes, Madam Chair. I think it's also worth pointing out that just for members' information and for the public's information, what are the implications of, obviously, Dr. Elkins presented the summative of assessment equals proficient, and would be voting on that to finalize it. I just want to point out it does call under the superintendent's contract, which is a public document and I believe is posted on the school committee site, under section 4.1B, which discusses her salary, that if the superintendent is rated proficient or exemplary this year, then she is eligible for a 2.5% salary increase. It also calls for for this contract year, it's very specific. It also calls for after January 1st for the chair and the superintendent to enter into good faith negotiations about salary and potential salary increases for year 3 and 4, which would, be after the next evaluation, including getting a market rate survey of superintendents, which the chair has asked for are broken out by like-sized districts in various regions across the country, so that she has that information available when she and the superintendent start negotiations, which would then be brought to the full committee, obviously. So I just want to make sure this is all public. It is all on the superintendent's contract, but I just wanted to highlight that in case members are wondering, well, what do we do about salary and that type of thing? If the committee votes the proficient rating at the next meeting, then it is automatic for the superintendent, 2.5% as of July 1st. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll now move on to public comment on reports. Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. We have 2 speakers for public comment on reports, Kim Emery and Michael Heischman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Again, Kim Emery, BPS mom, a resident of West Roxbury. Regarding the Council of Great City Schools membership, I wonder if members here might consider negotiating with the council for a 15% reduction of the membership dues, since council's work last year around becoming an inclusive district expressly excluded and overlooked the learning outcomes and disparities of 15% of our district's students with disabilities, those entitled to FAPE via a 504 plan, who were not considered a constituency needing prioritization. Related to the superintendent's evaluation, a new school year presents a wonderful opportunity to reinforce areas of strength as well as confront and embrace our areas of growth. And I wanted to reflect on the superintendent's self-identified areas of focus, prioritizing and accelerating academic performance. According to the 2022 NAEP results, it showed opportunity gaps widening for marginalized populations, specifically Black and Brown students, students with disabilities, and multilingual students. Instruction needs to be differentiated to meet students where they are. Please invest in cultivating and enhancing skill sets for school leaders and educators, and hold accountable those who are unwilling to adjust their practice at the expense of students' learning potential. Strengthening access to social emotional learning. Prioritize giving students supports as well as partnerships for families to help cultivate preventive measures, as well as awareness for treatment options. Developing authentic family and community engagement practices. Families need reassurance, not just words, that school teams and district staff will be held accountable when existing protocols to engage families are bypassed or or dismissed as optional and not required. Ensuring student safety. Educate school communities around divisive language and practices, those that detract from a sense of belonging. When incidents happen, hold school teams and district staff accountable to not diminish or underplay violent acts. Transparency and honesty matter.
30 seconds.
Increasing opportunity for both central office and schools. The Human Capital Report of 2022 indicated that 50% of central office staff had been evaluated. This is emblematic of a district not committed to positive outcomes. Please listen to families when they take the time to raise their concerns. Our district can and must improve outcomes for our students. I believe in a growth mindset, and I hope BPS can live up to that optimism. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Michael Heischman.
I'm back again. So when I spoke last time, I was talking about racism, and I was talking about the O'Brien as an example of that. It's going to be moved to the edge of the community where white people live. It's going to be less diverse, and those Black and brown children who will choose to attend will be spending too much of their precious time on transportation. 500 extra seats for our most privileged students. Meanwhile, most of our Black and brown children will continue to attend unhealthy, unsafe, and under-resourced facilities. In the next few years, these survivors will face more school closings. The promise of a gourmet dinner for a few and continued indigestion for the many is a central part of Ms. Skipper's educational policies. This is what racism and white supremacy looks like. Transparency. Important decisions continue to be made in secrecy and behind the curtains. The most recent example is this meeting. I went to the website at 4:45 p.m. and then at 6:15 p.m. to peek at Attorney Tidwell's report. It wasn't there. I was hoping to see it so I would be able to have an opportunity to see it before creating my testimony. However, something interesting happens in the report. I've been testifying about the letter sent by Black and brown educators since last August. I started testifying in October. It seems that she did not get that letter when she began her investigation. So I've been asking this question for a while. Okay, one is, when did you members of the school committee first know? Was it in August, September, or was when I and two other whistleblowers let you know in October? The second, in terms of the whole report, it doesn't even mention Ms. Skipper. So I want to ask the question, what happened to those Black and brown educators at central office that lost their jobs to be replaced by Ms. Skipper's Somerville cronies? It's like, that's not even part of the investigation that we heard in the report. This is a racist, whitewash, racist cover-up. Health and safety.
20 seconds.
COVID is, I'm going to skip that. I only have a few seconds. When Dr. Cassellius took office, she visited every school, conducted a listening campaign, and the school committee approved a long-range plan. Ms. Skipper does not have a vision, or if she does, it hasn't been communicated. She was not hired to be a visionary.
Mr. Heischman.
A mechanic. I will send my whole testimony to you. It's interesting that the school committee and the superintendent live in a different world than the public. Thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you. Chair Robinson, that concludes our speakers for this evening.
Thank you. Is there any new business? Okay, that concludes our business for this evening. The next
We
school
got one
committee.
person.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Just two new business items that I hope we can make sure is on an agenda for the future. I thought Miss Manning shared with us some data this evening around the exam schools and the 10-point implications. We've talked about it. We are about to enter an enrollment. Then we'll be entering the process for admissions for next year within, the next few months. And I want to make sure that we are revisiting that policy, the unintended consequences, and the possibility of doing what we've heard a lot of folks come to the table asking for, which is to direct the 10 points to income eligible families and not cluster by neighborhood. And so I just hope that I fear that we're going to get to a place where it's too late to make a decision, and we have time to talk about it. So I hope I get to see that on an agenda soon. And then I would also just like to see, as we're talking about admissions going into the next school year, sort of any plans for reducing the number of students who are administratively placed because they're not completing applications for school choice, and sort of what is the current data around that, and also what are the interventions we're putting in place to narrow that number with a real specificity around what is our actual goal? How much do we think we can reduce it by in a single year? And then what will it look like in terms of direct student support and family support around those options?
No. Both good points, and we will make sure that we have a chance to address both of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that concludes our business for this evening. However, the next school committee meeting will take place in person on Wednesday, September 13th at 6 p.m. at the Bowling Building in Nubian Square. We will be holding hybrid meetings, and folks can tune in through Boston City TV or on Zoom. Because we're going back in person, there will be a few changes. First, we will be starting at 6 p.m. to allow members for travel time during the evening commute. Secondly, we want to continue to offer virtual testimony. So the committee will continue to offer 2 public comment periods, with the first comment period capped at 1 hour. Priority will be given to those testifying in person. Time permitting, the committee will then open it up to remote testimony. After 1 hour, the committee will move on its regular business, and anyone who did not have the opportunity to share testimony will have the opportunity to do so at the end of the meeting. Of course, written testimony is always welcome. As we transition back to in-person meetings, we will continue to evaluate what is working and what may need to change. Are there any questions about going back in person? Okay. If there's nothing further, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Somebody in second. Ms. Sullivan, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Alkins,
Yes.
Mr. Cadet Hernandez,
Yes.
Ms. Lima Barbosa,
Yes.
Ms. Polanco Garcia, Mr. Tran, Mr. O'Neill,
Yes, and good night all.
Ms. Robinson.
Yes, good night, and look forward to seeing you at the Bowling Building. Good night.